Kane thought that things were finally looking up. He had just finished his third year of college after having taken the previous year off due to his entire family, both of his parents and paternal grandmother, passing away in a car accident as they drove down to visit him. He took a year off to grieve, but that was all he could allow himself. It hurt to say, but he was an orphan now, and he had nobody to rely on but himself. Therefore, he needed to make something of himself, not only for the income but also to make his deceased loved ones proud. He worked his ass off the past year and achieved a perfect 4.0 GPA. Thankfully, one of his professors noticed his hard work and hired him as a research assistant for this summer. This professor happened to be one of the most famous in his field, infectious diseases, and so working with him could be a huge boost to his resume. I can practically have my pick of graduate or medical programs with a reference from him. Furthermore, Kane was getting paid to travel with his professor to Brazil. Some outbreak of some unknown disease had occurred there, and so his professor was asked to see if he could identify the disease and possibly come up with a treatment. Of course, as an undergraduate student, Kane wouldn't be of much help. He was practically going there just to fetch his boss drinks, take notes, and organize samples. The rest of his free time he could use to check out the beaches. Brazil, the land of supermodels, Kane thought in anticipation. They had just arrived at the airport and he had already spotted several women at the level of a Victoria's Secret runway model. This may just be the best summer ever. And after what I went through, I more than deserve it. However, first he had to do some work. After being picked up from the airport, they were driven to a remote village surrounded by trees. Strangely, the village looked kind of new. This is a temporary village they set up out of the city to quarantine all of the infected identified. A local translator explained to them. His professor nodded, smart choice. Currently, this illness has a 100% death rate. Are there still no clues as to what it might be? Virus? Bacteria? Maybe even a prion. One of the local doctors looked embarrassed, no clue. Which is why we are so grateful to have you here, Dr. Blackwell. Here will be your accommodations. The translator said while walking them towards a 2-bedroom shack. Not quite what I imagined as my living conditions for this trip. But I guess it'd do. At least everything is clean and all of the furniture and appliances even look new. The local doctor and translator were still there once they had finished putting away their bags in their respective rooms. The doctor spoke anxiously. I know you must be incredibly tired from the long plane ride over, doctor, but is there any chance you could begin looking at the patients from today? After all, every second we delay may be the difference between life and death for one of our citizens. Well, if you put it like that. They both nodded in understanding and followed the two men to what looked like a military tent with medical personnel covered from head to toe running in and out of it. Inside were dozens of hospital beds with groaning patients. Ugh, it smells like death in here. I see why they treat them where they have access to fresh air. Kane tried his best to maintain his facial expression so as not to offend any of the patients. His professor, on the other hand, immediately put on a fresh hazmat suit before marching over with no hesitation to one of the patients. As Kane was not essential personnel and shouldn't be directly interacting with the patients, he did not have access to one of the limited hazmat suits. He had to make do with a lab coat, gloves, and mask. Splat. Suddenly a loud exclamation came out of his professor before several medical staff rushed over to the patient he was examining. In front of Kane was a bright yellow dotted line that only those in suits could pass. Therefore, he stood on the tips of his toes to get a better look at the patient. Kane could see a brown and black blob lying on the patient's lap. When he looked at the patient's face, he realized what it was: his nose. His nose had rotted and fallen off of his face. What the F dash? Ah! The patient screamed in pain as the medical staff attempted to clean the gaping hole in the middle of his face. Flesh-eating disease, although not uncommon, it's not an unheard of disease. They shouldn't have had to fly us out for that. Kane continued to watch for clues. As the patient thrashed about in pain, his gown opened to reveal large black bulges all over his skin. The bubonic plague? Kane thought, feeling as though he was transported to a medieval-themed hell. Then, the bedsheet on the patient's lap fell to the ground as he thrashed about, revealing his deformed legs. Elephantiasis. Kane looked around in horror as he backed away towards the entrance of the tent. What the hell is this thing? It's like some mad scientist decided to combine the most horrifying diseases mankind has ever experienced into some kind of freak disease. The patient's eyes quickly clouded over into white before he fell back and began to have a seizure on the bed. The staff held him down to prevent him falling to the floor. "I need to get out of here." Kane felt as though he was going to throw up. As he rushed out, he bumped into an entering nurse who happened to cough on him at that very moment. Ugh. Forget beaches. Forget supermodels. I want to go home right now. Unfortunately, his wish was never granted. Kane's body, or at least the ashes it was burnt into, never left Brazil.
Hey everyone, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy the audiobooks, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to support us further, consider becoming a Patreon member. As a member, you'll gain the ability to request the next part of a novel audiobook I've uploaded, depending on your Patreon tier.
Kane panicked as he remembered the sensation of what felt like thousands of worms crawling beneath his skin as it decayed. The immense pain that racked through his bones with each breath. The feeling of gradually losing his mind as he could no longer distinguish reality from fiction. He calmed down as he looked down at his smooth, tanned skin. "Sigh, I haven't thought about my past life in close to a decade," he shivered, "and for good reason. I forgot how terrible my ending was." He laid down in bed for nearly an hour just staring at his skylight as he tried to compose himself. "If I have to relive that experience every time B infects me, I don't know if I could do this. Even with my college admission on the line." That's right, B. The last that he remembered, B was forcefully recalled from his brain by the system to his star space. Through the bond he could sense guilt coming from B. Kane looked at BEA's status window. 942/1000 SP, it worked. And compared to the 935 SP it was prior to infecting him, it seems to be even more effective than hunting white-grade spiritual creatures. With trepidation, Kane opened his own status window, hoping that the damage wasn't too severe. His spiritual power was now at 905 SP. A drop equal to the amount that BEA's increased. However, it was easier to recover lost spiritual power than it was to condense spiritual power to permanently increase the amount of spiritual power you possess. It could even be recovered passively with enough time. It was the difference in effort between filling a partly empty 1-liter jar to exactly 1 liter of water, compared to trying to stretch the width of that same jar to make it suddenly hold 2 liters of water. He saw a flashing red star next to his other personal information, such as height and constitution, which he rarely looked at. Clicking on the star next to his mental strength reading, he received the message. * abnormal status in host detected, triggering a temporary 30% decline in mental strength. It is advised to avoid any exertions in mental strength for at least 24 hours to avoid this condition from becoming permanent. HAAA. So I can't even study or condense spiritual power. The academic exam is in 13 days. I'll feed B every 3 days and make sure to get proper rest for at least 24 hours before the exam. Based on the current SP B was able to achieve in a sitting, she should be able to upgrade to red grade safely before the Dark Moon entrance exam in 20 days. I'm practically killing myself to reach 2 stars prior to the admissions test, which should safely land me in the top 10% of applicants. But how did that monster Bridget talked about during her admissions test almost reach 3 stars? To avoid using any mental strength, Kane informed his family that he would be coming down for dinner and went to sleep with the sun still out. When he woke up the next day, he still didn't feel at 100%, but he was reluctant to waste any more time. He cracked open one of his textbooks but was forced to close it in only 10 minutes after not being able to concentrate. I guess I really do need to completely rest my mind for the full 24 hours. The next time I let B infect me, I will have to set some kind of time restriction to hopefully reduce the penalty. Unable to just sit around, he decided to go for a walk into the city. His first stop was to the blacksmith to return the space ring. However, when he arrived, he was suddenly reminded of his plan to buy an enchanted armor. He had originally thought that he'd have to go hunting a couple more times in order to afford one, but due to how much he made the last time he went hunting, he could look to see if he could afford one now. It's not as if he could do anything else better with his time with the penalty currently in effect. Even if he couldn't afford one he liked, he'd at least have an idea of how much more to save. With that thought in mind, after returning the ring to Fenios, he went to the back of the shop where the enchanted armors were located. Both Phineos and his teacher seemed busy in the back room, so he didn't bother them with requesting descriptions when he could read the general effects of each armor for himself. It took nearly an hour to read the descriptions of all the armor suitable for those with red-grade spiritual power. That is, 2-star armors. He decided to remain optimistic that he would condense his 2nd star by the time of the exam. After reading them all, he had a headache. Whether it was due to all the reading or having to make a decision, he wasn't sure. He eventually settled on choosing between 4 sets of armor. Interestingly, their sigils' effects were as varied as their gold, black, red, and silver colors. The gold armor had the most straightforward effect for armor. Using materials from a gold attribute spiritual beast and having a sigil to boost defense when injected with spiritual power, it would make the wearer practically immune to physical attacks beneath the orange grade. It would be a huge help if the Dark Moon exam once again requires successful applicants to withstand a beast tide. His chances of not being eliminated due to an injury would be much greater. However, it had its limitations. For one, it would only protect his upper body. He could still be injured in other areas. Additionally, it was a hard armor and much heavier than what he was used to wearing. Its weight would likely impede his movements with the spear or if he had to dodge an attack aimed at an uncovered area. Finally, it only offers protection against the most basic physical attacks. Cain would still be vulnerable to poisons, the heat from flames, and more. Therefore, Maine eventually decided to eliminate it because he did not think it'd provide a significant boost to his chances of passing the exam. The black armor was a soft armor with a very unique effect. Created from the materials of a rare shadow attribute spiritual creature, and enchanted with a corresponding sigil, it led to a miraculous effect. When injected with spiritual power at night or in a suitably dark environment, the wearer would become invisible. He wanted it. Just looking at it, his mind was full of ninja and assassination fantasies starring him. However, his immediate need is to pass the entrance exam, which would most likely occur during the day. Therefore, although it was an overpowered piece of equipment in certain environments and circumstances, it really wouldn't be much help in passing the exam. So, with great reluctance, he turned towards the other 2 pieces of equipment. The red armor had a passive effect of granting its wearer a massive boost in their resistance to heat and fire attribute attacks. Additionally, when injected with spiritual power, 70% of the energy obtained from recent fire attribute attacks can be released. Therefore, it not only provided defensive but also offensive capabilities. Furthermore, fire attribute contracts are the most common initial contract for 1-star beast tamers. Additionally, fire attribute spiritual creatures are some of the most common in the whole empire, only rare in the north. Therefore, he would likely be able to make great use of its functions. Although the beast tide will likely have creatures with a variety of attributes, not having to worry about those with one of the most offensive attributes is a huge advantage. Additionally, he could take the energy from fire attacks he receives and use it against attackers with other attributes. This armor would increase the tactics he could use. Therefore, it was the one he was leaning the most towards out of the 4. However, he still had some hesitation with selecting it due to the 4th armor. The wild card. The 4th armor was really not something he ever expected to see here, in a small city. It also definitely wasn't something that someone of his level should have ever had the opportunity to obtain. It was made from the materials of a member of the Protean species. The lowest member of this species begins at gold quality, while the levels of its future evolutions reach a level beyond Cain's knowledge. Proteans are one of the most difficult species to track and hunt due to their shape-shifting abilities, able to assume the forms and abilities of pretty much any creature at or below their level in spiritual power that they lay eyes on. As such, the characteristics of the weapons and armors made from their materials are similarly variable. The one in front of Cain only had one effect: to absorb the spiritual power of a spiritual creature and give birth to an armor with the abilities of that creature as the basis. Therefore, it's not yet a final product. Its appearance and abilities will differ depending on the wearer's spiritual beast. B was a water attribute, but also a super rare mental attribute. Although it was a huge gamble to not know what abilities the armor he buys may have, if the armor can inherit a mental attribute from B, he would have made a lot of money. Mental attribute equipment often will cost several times that of other attribute equipment due to the rarity of the spiritual creatures needed to obtain the materials and how troublesome it is to deal with such creatures. If he walked away from it now, he knew he'd be constantly questioning what if, for months to even years. But there really is not guarantee that the armor effects that are manifested would even be useful. Cain was in agony over this difficult choice. How did this armor even get here? And why is its level so low? Most equipment made from proteans should require at least 4 stars to operate. No matter how shoddy the workmanship is, its level should not drop to 2 stars. What's the catch? Realizing that it'd be impossible to decide between the 2 sets of armor alone, he knocked on the door to the back room to request some more information. Going to the door clearly marked with, "Do not disturb," Kane did just exactly that. Knock knock. Nothing. Maybe they didn't hear me. This time he knocked louder. Knock knock. Bang. The door was opened up hard enough to blow back all of the hair from his face. A couple inches closer and he may be leaving the store with a black eye. Can you not read? Ahem. Kane cleared his throat in embarrassment. I wanted to buy another armor. This is a store, isn't it? Ah, how I miss the customer is always right attitude of consumerism. The blacksmith clearly tried to cover up his embarrassment. Yes, so buy whatever you need from Phineos. And moved to close the door. Seeing this, Kane immediately stuck his foot. Ouch. I would, but Phineos isn't in the store. He isn't. Where the hell is he? Back there with you. He turned around to see Phineos in a corner of his workshop examining the completed parts of what would be his full body armor. Phineos. What are you doing back here? Phineos. He kept calling to no response. His student was in his own world drooling over the gauntlets he had just completed. Ah. I will complete your order. I could use a break from back here anyways. He left the room while grumbling about kids these days and their lack of work ethic. I guess some things don't change no matter the world you're in, Kane thought. Kane went to where he left the red and silver sets of armor. I need help deciding between these two. I'm pretty aware of the advantages of the fire attribute armor, but I would like some more information about why the silver one isn't a higher level. Is there something wrong with it? Some kind of hidden harm it'd cause the wearer. Seeing the silver armor, he immediately nodded in understanding. It really is rare for an object made of protean materials to be so low quality. However, it can't be helped. If they had been of higher quality, it never would have been our city's turn to obtain these materials. They would have been kept in the capital or another major city. The source of this armor was a mutant protean. Despite reaching adulthood, it could not condense spiritual power of a grade higher than red, unlike the average protean that could easily reach yellow grade before evolving to a higher level. Therefore, this armor is limited to 2 stars. Kane finally understood. Not all mutations were advantageous. Some could be advantageous and give a spiritual creature an additional attribute or even a completely different attribute atypical for their species. Some may also result in a better constitution or higher intelligence. Other mutations may not have any practical, resulting in only aesthetic changes like a different eye or fur color. However, some mutations were harmful. Like the one this protean seemed to have. Making it unable to progress to the typical level of strength for their species. Do you think this mutation will have any bad effects on the likelihood of the armor developing a good skill? Your concerns are understandable, which is why despite its source material, it has remained unsold for the months that I've had it. Those that can afford an enchanted armor would spend more money on an armor that they know already has great effects. This armor is a gamble. Only those with a lot of faith in the quality of their spiritual beast contract would risk it. However, from the information that I've obtained regarding the protean, despite its inability to condense spiritual power of a higher grade, its basic abilities as a protean were no different than its peers. Therefore, the armor should function no differently from other similar ones except for having a lower limit to the level of spiritual power it can handle. At those words, Kane made his choice. He decided to gamble. Both of them were thankfully well within his 500,000 CD budget. However, either one was easily more than 10 times the price of his current soft armor. The flame attribute armor was 380,000 CD, while the protean armor, due to its effects being a gamble, only cost 330,000 CD. The price also reassured him. If he really disliked the effects that were born after it received BEA's spiritual power, he should be able to scrape up enough to buy the other armor after going hunting again. Hopefully, by then the White Widow would either have been killed or returned back to its territory. He had also thought about selling his old armor to get back some money, but he wouldn't be able to get more than 30% of what he'd paid for it, and that amount of money is no longer significant to him. It was a decent quality armor that could be used if one of the other kids in the orphanage awakened an affinity later on. After making the payment, Cain left the store with nervous anticipation. First returned home and had a bath before lighting 4 candles in circle facing each direction. None of these actions had any practical purpose, but he felt like a sense of ceremony during a luck-based gamble like this would help him calm down. It gave the illusion that he had more control than he actually did. Laying down the armor in the middle of the candles and sitting cross-legged next to it, he called out B, before placing her on the armor and telling her where to direct her spiritual power. Gradually the sigil on the armor began to glow with a dark pink hue as it was injected with BEA's spiritual. Even without the system, just looking at the color of BEA's spiritual power let him know that she was close to advancing to red grade. Slowly the armor began to glow so brightly he could no longer look directly at it. Once he sensed that the light had dimmed, he opened his eyes. He was expecting there to be a drastic change in appearance. However, it was still silver, but now with hints of blue when turned in the light. Additionally, instead of the smooth appearance it previously had, it now had texture. Covering the entire armor were small overlapping circles that resembled scales, however the size of these scales was far smaller than any known spiritual creature Cain had seen in person or in a textbook. Are these supposed to symbolize BEA's many splits? Cain pondered. Looking at the armor, and knowing that it is made from a protean, most people will probably assume that my initial contract is some kind of reptile or aquatic creature. Unfortunately, their attempts to figure out my contract will prove useless. There's nothing like B, Cain though smugly. Let's see what effects you have. For enchanted equipment, unlike normal ones, the information on its effects will appear in the user's mind when their spiritual power is first inserted. Cain began to do so. It clearly took longer than when using the 1-star spear, due to his spiritual power not quite being at the ideal red grade to use 2-star equipment. However, the level of his spiritual power was close enough to still make it usable by him. Once he officially enters the realm of a 2-star beast tamer he should be able to fill it with his spiritual power instantly. As soon as it was filled with his spiritual power, the information appeared in his head. He soon began to shake from excitement. It had successfully inherited BEA's mental attribute. In addition to the passive effects of granting the user resistance against mental attacks while slightly increasing their mental strength, it also had an active skill. When injected with spiritual power the user could activate an area of effect mental attack that caused disorientation and pain to all in the surroundings. The size and strength of the mental attack were dependent on the amount of spiritual power injected. All of Cain's regrets about giving up the fire attribute armor were now gone. This armor now also added to his attack arsenal, and it was also an AoE attack, which were rare among individuals at his level of strength. The passive effects of the armor may also help him with another area he had been having trouble with, feeding B. Although, it needed to be tested. He was confident that if B infected him while he was wearing the armor, he should be able to withstand B for longer and hopefully the negative side effects on his mental strength also won't be as harsh. Seeing that the 24-hour hold on using mental strength was up, he decided to put on the armor and give it a test run. Previously I had only been able to hold on for 5 minutes, I wonder how long I could hold on now. He thought once the infection began and he started the timer in his hand. By the time 5 minutes passed, he only felt a little lightheaded with no other symptoms. It wasn't until the 9-minute mark that the edges of his vision began to darken and he directed B to exit his body. System, show me the damage. Immediately, his status screen opened, showing a familiar red star next to his mental strength. However, likely because he stopped this time before the most severe symptoms began, the penalty to his mental strength would be resolved in only 12 hours, half of the previous time. He then went to BEA's status screen. After another feeding session, her spiritual power had increased rapidly to 953 SP. Thankfully, it doesn't look like the armor significantly inhibited BEA's ability to absorb spiritual power, focusing more on inhibiting the mental attacks her infection causes. Additionally, since he could tolerate her longer, the amount she absorbed also increased. Cain decided to revise his current college preparation plan. Instead of feeding B every 3 days to avoid the 24-hour penalty, with the armor he could now afford to feed B every other day. With the planetarium provided by the system allowing him to absorb spiritual power more effectively, he can make up for what B took in the days between feedings. With this new plan, B may reach red grade spiritual power in around 2 weeks. B reached the necessary spiritual power in only 9 days. Once she reached full saturation, she began the process of condensing her energy into a small ball, similar to the stars within humans. However, spiritual beasts, unlike humans who condense a second star while their first remains with each increase in spiritual power grade, beasts shatter and replace their previous low-quality orbs with one of a higher grade. These orbs not only serve as the site of storage for spiritual power, but they also will passively convert all of the absorbed spiritual power into a grade equal to the orb. Therefore, B will no longer have to spend conscious effort to condense the spiritual power she absorbs to red grade. Once she crosses this step, all of the spiritual power in her body will become denser and more powerful, and a beautiful deep red. Each molecule of red spiritual power is equal in energy to at least 10 molecules of white spiritual power. That's why the same moves when executed by red grade spiritual beasts compared to white grade ones, use less of their own energy but manage to exert more power. However, crossing this step could also be dangerous, or even crippling for spiritual creatures. After all, in this process they need to also shatter their current source of strength. If they are not able to condense an orb of higher quality, all of that unrestrained energy without a container will wreak havoc in their bodies. This is why the quality of a spiritual beast is important. It is rare for black iron quality spiritual beasts to ever cross this threshold in their life. Thankfully, as a bronze quality beast, condensing a red grade orb should be quite simple for B. Getting to a higher level though will be challenging without evolving. During the time B was undergoing this process, he recalled her back to the star space. It was the most ideal environment for her after all. He anticipated that it would take her 3 more days to fully finish, taking 5 days in total. Thankfully, the feedings were finished 2 days ago, the academic exam was tomorrow and he needed to preserve his mental strength as much as possible. In order to be fully prepared. In the middle of the night, with only a lit lamp to keep him company, he finished marking his last available practice exam. Thankfully, Bridge decided to sleep at the Wolfblood training hall the past week so that he didn't have to worry about keeping him up and could better focus on studying. This exam was one from 4 years ago, and supposedly the most difficult exam in recent years. That year only 3 students achieved a perfect score in the entire empire, unlike the usual 8 to 10 perfect scorers. Additionally, even students who answered 2 questions incorrectly managed to land in the top 100. Therefore, he was saving this exam as his last one to test his ability, in case this year happens to also be more challenging than usual. 98, correct. 99, correct. 100. Kane finished going through the answers for all 100 questions in his last section, Science. He had already calculated his score in the other 4 sections, Spiritual Creatures, History, Math, and Geography. He had received perfect scores in all 5 of them. A perfect score on one of the hardest exams in recent history. Feeling fully prepared for tomorrow, Kane finally went to bed after setting his alarm for 5 in the morning, 2 hours before the exam actually started. He absolutely did not want to risk being late tomorrow. Any late entrants will be turned away at the door and have to take the exam next year if they want to enter an academic major. The next morning he awoke not to an alarm, but to the smell of curry, one of his favorite dishes being prepared. Who would make curry first thing in the morning? Suddenly hungry, Kane headed downstairs to find their neighbor Sally in the kitchen. Sally. What are you doing here? Without looking up from the pot she replied, Isn't your exam today? It's a 5-hour exam. I'm preparing the lunch for your halftime break. Growling. Although you can have some now if you'd like. She gave a smile at Kane's embarrassed expression. Don't mind if I do, he said while reaching for a bowl. Thank you so much, Sal. After eating breakfast and packing a lunch, he checked his bag for all of his required supplies plus his ID card and headed to the school. There was an hour until the exam, and it took 30 minutes to walk to school from the orphanage at the fringes of the city. Not to mention the long process it took to verify his identity, get through security and confirm his attendance for the exam. By the time he got seated there were only 5 minutes left until the exam. He could see several of his classmates stealing glances at him. Likely wondering why a student with an affinity as highly rated as his was taking the academic exam when he should be preparing for the beast taming exams that start next week. Doing his best to ignore them, Kane sharpened his spare pencil to calm down. Students, the exam will be starting shortly. Please put away everything except for a pencil and eraser. Any other Unilode objects will be confiscated and returned to you after the exam. A teacher that Kane didn't recognize began to hand out the exams as the other continued with the opening remarks. Make sure to keep your eyes on your own paper. There are spiritual creatures monitoring this classroom. Any attempts at cheating will have you forcefully removed from the room and your test thrown out. Several students looked around to see if they could see the spiritual creature but couldn't find it. Some began to even doubt if this was a line they used just to scare students away from cheating. However, Kane knew that it wasn't a lie used to scare them. Possibly because he was bound to a spiritual creature with mental attributes, he could vaguely sense his mind being repeatedly scanned by some kind of invisible force for any thoughts of cheating. The anti-cheating methods in this world are quite advanced. It's quite hard to defend against something looking at your mind to see if you'll cheat. Once every student had a test, a giant timer was displayed at the front of the room counting down from 60 minutes. Kane picked up his pencil and began his first section in anticipation. Kane returned home in a daze. He felt completely exhausted. Not because he found the exam significantly harder than the practice tests he took, it wasn't any harder than the one 4 years ago, but probably because it was the real deal, not a practice exam, and so his concentration and focus were dialed up to 110% the entire time. When he returned home, he immediately returned to his room, wanting to collapse on the bed. However, when he opened the door, he spotted Bridge. He hadn't seen his best friend and brother in weeks, and he had missed him dearly. Bridge immediately hopped up once Kane opened the door. "How did it go?" he asked anxiously. "Easy peasy." Kane laughed. "Now I only have to focus on the Beast Tamer exam in a week. How are you feeling?" "Great. Professionals really are different. I don't think I'd ever have a chance at passing the exam if I didn't have the help of the Wolfblood guys. The training was hard, but it paid off." Bridge held out his hand and then slowly a deep red glow began to appear on his fingers. "Red spiritual power. You're a 2-star Beast Tamer." Bridge's smug face suddenly looked a little embarrassed. "Lady is currently advancing in my star space, but I'm not quite there yet. However, I can't condense any more spiritual power, so I'm pretty sure I'm at the point where I can begin condensing my 2nd star. Since we're planning to leave for Dark Moon tomorrow, I was thinking I could advance to 2 stars on the train ride over. The trip will take 3 days anyway, and it's not like there's anything else we can do on there." Bridge's advancement to 2 stars suddenly reminded Kane of the egg he'd exchanged for him. "Bridge, by any chance did the trainer that helped you also give you a wolf for your 2nd contract?" "No," he thought about it, but he said the best he could provide is a bronze quality contract. "I could probably find a contract with a better quality once I'm admitted to college." "What about a silver quality cyan searing wolf?" "Sure. I'll see if Dark Moon City has one. But aren't they pretty rare outside of the north?" Bridge never would have known that 3 months ago. It looks like he had read up on wolf-type spiritual creatures once his affinity was confirmed. "They are, but I happen to have the egg of one." Now it was Kane's turn to act smug. He pulled out the incubating egg from under his bed. He'd been monitoring it and changing its incubation liquid every few days. The color was now a much deeper blue than when he first obtained it, and the chill was strong enough that if Kane hadn't already been close to 2 stars, he'd need to wear thick gloves while holding the incubator to avoid getting frostbite. "It'll probably hatch on the way to Dark Moon College. Take this. By the time you form your 2nd star, it'll probably hatch and you can contract it then." Bridge's eyes immediately welled with tears. He had seen the egg Kane brought home previously, but he had no idea that it was for him. He pulled Kane into a hug. "You are the best friend ever. I need to go back to the dojo." They got together to raise enough money to buy me the lowest quality space ring and fill it with enough food for Lady for weeks. But I need to get the food required for a searing pup now too. Bridge practically skipped out of the door. Wait, they bought him a space ring. Kane was in shock when he thought again about the prices he had seen when looking to buy one of his own. Where the heck can I find a higher level expert to dote on me? Kane grumbled as he began to pack his things. Thankfully, he only has to pack for himself, since unlike most contracts, B didn't require him to pack her food. The next morning Kane and Bridge were waved off by the members' New Beginnings orphanage along with John and Sally, as they left for the local train station. Once there, Kane used the ample savings he still had from hunting in the wilderness to upgrade both of their tickets to first class so that they could have private rooms and focus on their advancement. Their ticket first stops at Starfire City, the largest city in the southern region and the home of Starfire College. After stopping for an hour to pick up more travelers and do maintenance, the train will be going non-stop to Dark Moon City, the home of Dark Moon College. Once they entered the train, they were surprised to find it packed almost exclusively with teens. Most Beast Tamer exams were this week, therefore regardless of whether they were planning to take the exam for Starfire College, pretty much everyone looking to enter a beast taming major was on the train headed towards the major train hub in Starfire City. Going towards their assigned rooms, Kane was in lucky number 7, while Bridge was right next door in 6. When he entered the room he was pleasantly surprised. It wasn't at the level of a 5-star hotel, but it had a desk, mini fridge, a decent-sized comfortable bed, and a wide window that let in tons of natural light. Technically, it was a nicer room than the one he shared with Bridge at the orphanage. He sat on the bed and assessed his current condition for the exam. Beat was currently in the process of advancing in the star space, and she should finish around the same time they arrived at Dark Moon, giving him a red grade contract. Due to having to feed Beat continuously and focus on the academic exam, his spiritual power was only at 950 SP. However, if he concentrated day and night solely on cultivating in the planetarium, he should be able to improve by more than 20 points a day and condense his second star by the time the train arrives at Dark Moon. Good afternoon, passengers. We have arrived at the beautiful Starfire City. Please ensure that you have all of your belongings before exiting the train, as this is a layover. All vacated carts will be cleaned for their new occupants and all belongings left behind will be placed in a local lost and found. For those continuing on non-stop to Dark Moon City, you are free to exit and re-enter the train during the layover as long as you bring your boarding pass and identification. If you choose to leave, please ensure that you bring your belongings with you, or lock your private room, should you have one. The staff on board are not responsible for any lost or stolen items. Thank you for traveling with Celestial Rails. Please come again. After cultivating for several hours, his spiritual power had grown by 10 points. However, it was pretty draining on his mental strength to focus for that long, so he decided to exit the train for the duration of the layover. After all, this is the largest city in the southern region, and the second largest in the entire empire. He should take a look. Exiting the train, Kane bumped into a familiar face. That's right, he was taking the Starfire exam. Hey Phenios. You're here for the exam, right? Would you mind if I followed you to the college? I want to take a look. Ah. Kane. Sure, it's not far from here. They continued walking forward together, the atmosphere a little awkward since they'd only met a handful of times previously. How are you feeling about the exam? Did your teacher finish the full body armor in time? It's difficult to know how to feel since I have no idea what kind of mission I might get. However, thankfully the full armor was finished in time, and it is amazing. Phenio said with his eyes twinkling like stars. However, he didn't give more details on the effects of the full set, likely still on guard before the exam. Wow, major cities really are different. When they exited the station, Kane was taken aback by all of the beautiful architecture around. Although there were a lot of new buildings, their architecture was still designed to complement the historical buildings interspersed throughout the city. Many of the buildings had intricate stained glass windows depicting astronomical scenes or famous scenes from history. Every single surface of the buildings was also touched with intricate carvings, almost overwhelmingly so. Columns, window frames, balconies, and all the building's edges were full of asymmetrical and curved lines that vaguely mimic shapes from nature. If they weren't so well done, the excessive design would have looked gaudy and overwhelming, but instead it just looked classical and high-end. If he had to compare it to a similar place on Earth, it reminds him the most of the buildings he saw on a family trip to Catalonia, Spain. It didn't take long before they arrived at the college located in the heart of the city. Once again, Kane felt as though he was transported through time and space back to his family trip. The college, towering over every other building in the city, bore a striking resemblance to the Sagrada Familia in Spain. The most major difference being the material used to construct it giving off a golden hue when struck by the sun. Even Phenios, who had not looked fazed the majority of the way there, likely having visited this and other major cities in the past with his teacher, looked stunned by its beauty. It's so beautiful. I wonder what Dark Moon College looks like. Curiosity satiated, Kane wished Phineas good luck and headed back to the train. This is the final boarding call for all passengers booked for Train 32A, non-stop to Dark Moon City. Please proceed to Gate 3 immediately, all doors will close and departure will begin in approximately 3 minutes. This is the final boarding call for Train 32A. Thank you. Ah crap. That's me. He must have spent longer loitering around the city than he expected. He began to sprint towards the train but bumped into someone along the way, causing them to drop their belongings. I am so sorry. He bent to help them pick up their belongings and spotted a small boy with green hair and oversized glasses on his face. They both began to run towards the train. Once they were both safely on board, Kane once again turned to apologize. He really should not have been running so recklessly. It's no problem, we both got on the train just fine, the other mumbled shyly, avoiding eye contact. Are you by any chance going to Dark Moon City to take the college exam? Kane asked, unable to contain his curiosity. Befriending another test-taker couldn't hurt. No. He said in a barely audible mumble with his head still down. I am currently a student at Dark Moon, a second year. Are you actually a current student? Kane didn't mean to come off as rude, but he really wasn't expecting this small and timid kid to actually be his senior. He had passed that hellish Beastide exam last year. Fortunately, he seemed to think Kane's astonishment was due to the fact that he was heading to the college a full month before the school year for the current students officially began. I was recruited to help oversee the test and heal any injured applicants. If they aren't dead by the time they get to me. So he must have one or more contracts with a healing ability. Maybe that's how he survived the exam. Well, it was nice meeting you, senior. Hopefully we will be fellow students at Dark Moon next year. Kane then headed back to his room and began cultivating even more fervently. Visiting another top 5 college and meeting a current student made the reality that he was about to take the exams even more clear. His consciousness once again entered the planetarium. I must enter Dark Moon College. No matter what. Kane managed to reach 1000 SP mere hours before arriving at Dark Moon City. However, he did not push on to try and condense his second star with having to deboard so soon. If he started on the train and then was disturbed by the staff before he could finish, it may result in a failed attempt. Thankfully, a failed attempt at his level wouldn't be too dangerous, but it would still not be something he could recover from before the entrance test. There were still 2 full days before the test. He could wait until he was settled into a hotel before attempting to advance to 2 stars. Some more good news was that B had also finished her advancement in his star space this morning. With them both advancing, his odds of passing were looking much higher. Good afternoon, passengers. We have arrived at the wonderful Dark Moon City. The familiar deboarding message began to play. After ensuring he left nothing behind, he stepped into the hallway to find Bridge waiting for him. Hey. I was scared to knock in case you were in the middle of advancing as well. No, I'll wait until we check into the hotel to do that. I'm assuming by the wide grin on your face that you successfully condensed your second star. Yeah, but that's not the reason I'm so happy. The egg you gave me hatched 2 days ago, and now I have a contract with the 2 most beautiful wolf pups in the Empire. Let's hurry to the hotel so I can show her to you. Bridge began to pull Kane by the wrist impatiently. The second they exited the station, Kane felt as though he was transported to medieval England. Majority of the buildings had Gothic architecture. It was a city of tall spires stabbing into the sky. Additionally, unlike the colorful stained glass windows and gold-hued buildings common in Starfire City, the color scheme of Dark Moon City was much more muted. Mostly composed of black, gray and silver architecture. Combined with the cloudy weather, it definitely had a more gloomy vibe when compared to Starfire City. It was also beautiful, but in a more haunting way. However, strangely, Kane actually preferred Dark Moon City. It reminds me of Harry Potter. The little novel nerd in Kane's heart was greatly satisfied at seeing architecture that reminded him of one of his favorite series. They had reserved a room at a hotel close to Dark Moon College almost immediately after confirming their intention to attend the test there. Good thing too, as a majority of the hotels close to the college were fully booked right after the affinity ceremonies and students confirmed that they had an affinity ranked high enough to qualify. Kane and Bridge were actually a little late in trying to book a room, with everywhere they tried already being filled. They were about to try a hotel towards the edges of Dark Moon City when this one called them back about a cancellation. It seems like an overconfident high schooler, probably a legacy, had booked rooms for themselves and their family prior to awakening. After the affinity ceremony though they were forced to cancel the reservation when they didn't rate as highly as they anticipated. Kane and Bridge took both neighboring rooms available, anticipating that one or both of them may need to try and make a last-minute attempt at advancing and didn't want to risk being disturbed by a roommate. After putting his stuff away in his room, Kane went next door to Bridges. Although he wanted to try advancing right away, he was still curious about Bridges the searing wolf pup that he'd only seen in pictures. Also, he should probably fill his stomach before attempting an advancement. The moment he entered Bridges' room, it felt like it was the middle of winter instead of summer. The source of the extreme chill was sitting on Bridges' bed. A small wolf puppy with shining white fur and large sparkling blue eyes. It really is adorable. Kane thought jealously. This is how he'd always imagined a contract to be. Not like, he cut off the in case B heard it. After all, although she didn't meet his aesthetic tastes, she was still a trustworthy companion. Kane kept a healthy distance from the silver quality pup. After all, he had read that just touching them could result in frostbite. Bridge though, as a result of the resistance provided by the contract, had no such worries. Although he still found her extremely cold, holding her wouldn't harm him. He scooped her into his hands and held her up for Kane to see. This is Princess. Kane was once again blown away by Bridges' naming sense. Doesn't she look like a cold and beautiful, yet aloof princess? It fits her, right? Why yeah. Thanks again for getting her for me, Kane. She's probably too young to be used during the entrance exam, but I can already tell that she's talented. She has an A-level skill. Really? Don't let BEA's possession of A-level skills fool you. Having a single A-level skill for spiritual creatures below gold quality is an indication that their combat talent is within the upper tiers of their species. Which one? I think it's called Absolute Zero. It makes her surroundings and all of her attacks extremely cold, even more so than the average searing wolf. A passive A-level skill. That's incredible. After showing off, Bridge recalled Princess into his star space and they both went down to eat dinner. Looking around at the room full of teenagers and their families, they were both filled with anticipation. Their future competitors, but also their future classmates, will be from among those here. Normally, Kane would try to mingle with those here, but he left that to Bridge. He needed to advance as soon as possible. So leaving Bridge to continue his conversation with what looked like a pair of siblings at a neighboring table, Kane headed back upstairs. It's not possible for anyone to know for sure, but it will probably have to do with hunting beasts like the last few years, said Aiden. Kane felt relieved. Hunting beasts was something he was confident in. I did hear something interesting though. Suddenly Addison leaned forward and lowered her voice. In previous years the limit to the number of admitted students had always been 100. It could be less but never more. However, this year the limit to the number of students that can pass is 99. One of the spots for this year has already been filled. That finally got Kane to look up from his plate in shock. How is that possible? Exclaimed Bridge in shock. Even Kane, with his S rating, was exempt from taking the exams. I thought the 5 colleges were high enough above that they didn't have to intentionally try and recruit anyone. Kane nodded. He had been hoping that his rating would make it easier to get into a top 5 college, but they really couldn't care less. They each have several students with an S rating desperately trying to enter them each year, so they don't care about trying to recruit one of them. Although he, and even Bridge, did receive some tempting offers from some high-tier schools just below the top 5, their background and the resources they could provide for him aren't on the same level. Is it nepotism? Some high-ranking professor's precious baby wanted to come here. Kane thought cynically. Aiden continued with an even lower voice, apparently some legacy from the capital awakened independently. However, instead of going to the First Celestial Academy, they chose to come to Dark Moon instead. None of the top 5 colleges would grant an exception otherwise. No matter your background or affinity rating. Just because they awakened independently. Kane was surprised that doing so was such a big deal. The two twins looked slightly surprised at Kane suddenly joining the conversation. Well yeah, it's been over a decade since someone awoke independently. It's even rarer to do so now than it was back then because, according to my grandfather, the lives of our generation are too cushy. Addison continued after her twin. To awaken independently suggests that you have an affinity so strong that it can't help but manifest even without the help of the ceremony. I also heard this student has an exceptionally strong gift too. Now that's just unfair. Are they the actual protagonist of this world? Kane thought bitterly. Screw having a system, maybe it'd have been better to transmigrate into that person's body. The system's capabilities are dependent upon the host's own efforts. Kane thought he detected a slight grudge in the system's usually monotone voice. Wow. I guess it's good they're not taking the exam then, huh? One less competitor. Bridge chuckled nervously. Not really, they already took up a spot without having to fight for it. Kane felt some resentment. Is that person's talent really that high that they don't even need to fight for their spot? Even S-rated individuals and even the descendants of royalty need to take the admissions tests. In an attempt to lighten the suddenly gloomy atmosphere, Addison changed the subject. You have an S rating, huh? What kind of affinity gets you a rating that high? Everyone at the table, including Bridge who still didn't know his affinity, and even individuals at the nearby tables trying to eavesdrop, turned to Kane. Kane looked around at all of the people peeking at him from the corners of their eyes. Probably trying to get info on a major contender for a spot at the college. I'd prefer not to say. Suddenly the faces of those around stiffened. Ha ha. Kane hasn't even shared his affinity with me and I'm his brother. Don't take it to heart, Bridge said in an attempt to get rid of the awkward atmosphere. But Kane could sense that his refusal to share his affinity, even with him, bugged Bridge. It's hard to explain my affinity to the people of this world. I'm not even sure whether or not people here are aware they exist. None of my science books mention anything about them. But I should probably give him some information. I wouldn't want this to drive a wedge between us. With that thought in mind, when they returned back upstairs, he pushed his way into Bridge's room before he had a chance to close the door. Bridge looked surprised at his sudden action. I'm sorry about what happened downstairs. I didn't mean to make things awkward with your new friends. You don't have to apologize for that. We just met them. I understand why you wouldn't want to share something so sensitive with them. I just don't understand why you can't tell me. Do you not trust me? Bridge asked sadly. Ugh. I knew he'd be thinking like this. I do trust you. I just haven't told you my affinity because it's hard to explain. Bridge didn't look like he believed him. What's so hard to explain about an affinity? Just say what was in your affinity egg. An animal? Did an element gush out? Kane continued to reduce Bridge's doubts. When my affinity egg cracked, it was a species that I had never seen before. So when I got tested I really had no idea that I'd receive an S rating, because I didn't even know what my affinity was. Honestly, I'm still not 100% sure what my affinity is. Not entirely true, but I do know that it's pretty hard to find things that meet the criteria for me to bind. That's why I was so insistent on coming to Dark Moon. Because the very first time I felt the pull for a potential bond was in an egg found around one of Dark Moon College's relics. Bridge finally seemed satisfied with this information. I'm glad. I was afraid you just didn't trust me. You gave me Princess, so if you need help finding a contract in the future let me know. After hugging him goodbye, Kane returned to his room relieved. It was time to get a good night's rest before the most important test of his life. Kane and Bridge ran into the twins again the next morning at breakfast. Thankfully, none of the awkwardness from yesterday remained. I'm sorry for yesterday. Sometimes I speak without thinking, but Aiden let me know that my question was completely inappropriate given the circumstances. It's fine, no problem. Kane was slightly flustered by the sudden apology. He had actually expected them to be upset at his refusal to answer after they gave him information yesterday. Together they walked towards Dark Moon College. It was a giant castle with Gothic architecture like the rest of the city, and similar to Starfire College it was also the tallest building in the city, with its tallest spires being visible even from the edges of the city. Arriving at the gates of the college, all four of them received a tag with their registration number. Kane and Bridge were number 3666 and number 3667, respectively. While the twins had arrived in the city and registered the day before them and were numbers 2942 and 2943. After confirming their attendance, they followed the long line of students to a circular building with many pointed arches. When they entered, he could tell that it was a theater that could accommodate at least 10,000 individuals, with all of the seats arranged in a ring surrounding the central stage. They had to go up 2 flights of stairs before they could find available seats. 30 minutes later, when it appeared as though nearly 7,000 students had arrived, a beautiful woman wearing glasses and a dark blue dress suit went on the stage. "Hello everyone. I am Assistant Professor Nightingale, the instructor for the mandatory Introduction to Spiritual Skills course that all first years must take." Spiritual skills. One of the things Kane most wanted to learn in college. I will now introduce the conditions for entering Dark Moon College. While she's getting right to it, huh? Usually these kinds of stuff start with some long speech by the educators, but I guess they can't be bothered to waste their breath on students who 99% of them they'll never see again. That's also probably why a first-year assistant professor is the one here overseeing the exams, rather than the dean, vice dean, or even just a full professor attending. Due to last year's beast tide which we used for the exams, the surrounding wild spiritual beasts are not currently at a great enough number to cause another beast tide. Therefore, this year's exams will be taking place in one of the college's relics. Immediately the students broke out into panicked whispers. Even Kane and the other 3 looked at each other with wide eyes. Didn't nearly 600 examiners die in one of their relics in previous years? Their number of applicants had just been restored to the numbers before that whole debacle, and they're going straight back to their old ways. Everyone please be quiet. Chatter chatter. Shut the hell up you brats. The refined-looking women suddenly shouted, spiritual power infused into her voice. Ugh. Kane and majority of the students looked as though they'd been hit. The teacher's level was clearly far above theirs, a level so high that Kane had never met it before. Ahem, we are aware of your concerns and we can assure you that the site of the examination will not be the same as the one from that year. They all knew what year she was talking about. In the relic, you will be brought to an artificial world in which 2 islands are connected by a bridge. Your job is to cross that bridge. Easy right? She said with a wide reassuring smile. But it didn't look the least bit trustworthy in the applicant's eyes. However, do keep in mind that any injuries received in this world will be sustained by you once you leave. So if you do not think you'll be able to pass, do not be stubborn and just request to leave. The relic will immediately sense your intentions and you will be ejected. All students that pass the bridge will meet the minimum conditions for admittance. If more than 99 students pass, then the score for your performance, as assessed by the relic, will be used to determine the top 99 applicants. Your ranking in the entrance test will also be your ranking when entering the school, so try your best. She didn't say what the point of such a ranking was, but Kane was sure there was some kind of benefit to ranking highly in this test. Now you may all leave your seats and follow your seniors to the entrance of the relic. Kane and the rest of the applicants did as directed. Their group of 4 was towards the middle of the line. Although there were thousands of applicants, the line was moving forward rapidly. When he got closer to the front he could see why. There didn't appear to be a limit to the number of students that the relic could accommodate. Every second another student entered. He could see the green-haired second year that he'd previously met treating a student with a gash across his abdomen. His contract looked like a dandelion that was continuously blowing spores to the wounded. It was a contract Kane had never seen in a textbook before, meaning it was likely extremely rare. He also saw a large stone tablet with the names of the students that had successfully passed the test. So far over 1,000 students had entered, yet only 9 names were listed. Kane wondered if the order of the names meant anything. Was it the order in which they cleared the relic? Or was it a reflection of how high their individual scores were? After another 500 students entered the relic, and 5 more names appeared, he got his answer. The order of the names was most likely the ranking of their individual scores. He wished he knew how the score was determined. Is it timing-based? How few injuries they received? Their ability to cope with dangers? From some of the injuries he was seeing the students leave with, he could guess that there were spiritual creatures in there. Does how many we kill affect the score? Ha! There's no use in worrying. I'll just have to do my best. Kane and Bridge ran into the twins again the next morning at breakfast. Thankfully, none of the awkwardness from yesterday remained. I'm sorry for yesterday. Sometimes I speak without thinking, but Aiden let me know that my question was completely inappropriate given the circumstances. It's fine, no problem. Kane was slightly flustered by the sudden apology. He had actually expected them to be upset at his refusal to answer after they gave him information yesterday. Together they walked towards Dark Moon College. It was a giant castle with Gothic architecture like the rest of the city, and similar to Starfire College, it was also the tallest building in the city, with its tallest spires being visible even from the edges of the city. Arriving at the gates of the college, all four of them received a tag with their registration number. Kane and Bridge were number 3666 and number 3667, respectively. While the twins had arrived in the city and registered the day before them and were numbers 2942 and 2943. After confirming their attendance, they followed the long line of students to a circular building with many pointed arches. When they entered, he could tell that it was a theater that could accommodate at least 10,000 individuals, with all of the seats arranged in a ring surrounding the central stage. They had to go up 2 flights of stairs before they could find available seats. 30 minutes later, when it appeared as though nearly 7,000 students had arrived, a beautiful woman wearing glasses and a dark blue dress suit went on the stage. "Hello everyone. I am Assistant Professor Nightingale, the instructor for the mandatory Introduction to Spiritual Skills course that all first years must take." Spiritual skills. One of the things Kane most wanted to learn in college. I will now introduce the conditions for entering Dark Moon College. While she's getting right to it, Usually these kinds of stuff start with some long speech by the educators, but I guess they can't be bothered to waste their breath on students who 99% of them they'll never see again. That's also probably why a first-year assistant professor is the one here overseeing the exams, rather than the dean, vice dean, or even just a full professor attending. Due to last year's beast tide which we used for the exams, the surrounding wild spiritual beasts are not currently at a great enough number to cause another beast tide. Therefore, this year's exams will be taking place in one of the college's relics. Immediately the students broke out into panicked whispers. Even Kane and the other 3 looked at each other with wide eyes. Didn't nearly 600 examiners die in one of their relics in previous years? Their number of applicants had just been restored to the numbers before that whole debacle, and they're going straight back to their old ways. Everyone please be quiet. Chatter chatter. Shut the hell up you brats. The refined-looking woman suddenly shouted, spiritual power infused into her voice. Ugh. Kane and majority of the students looked as though they'd been hit. The teacher's level was clearly far above theirs, a level so high that Kane had never met it before. Ahem, we are aware of your concerns and we can assure you that the site of the examination will not be the same as the one from that year. They all knew what year she was talking about. In the relic, you will be brought to an artificial world in which 2 islands are connected by a bridge. Your job is to cross that bridge. Easy, right? She said with a wide, reassuring smile. But it didn't look the least bit trustworthy in the applicant's eyes. However, do keep in mind that any injuries received in this world will be sustained by you once you leave. So if you do not think you'll be able to pass, do not be stubborn and just request to leave. The relic will immediately sense your intentions and you will be ejected. All students that pass the bridge will meet the minimum conditions for admittance. If more than 99 students pass, then the score for your performance, as assessed by the relic, will be used to determine the top 99 applicants. Your ranking in the entrance test will also be your ranking when entering the school, so try your best. She didn't say what the point of such a ranking was, but Kane was sure there was some kind of benefit to ranking highly in this test. Now you may all leave your seats and follow your seniors to the entrance of the relic. Kane and the rest of the applicants did as directed. Their group of 4 was towards the middle of the line. Although there were thousands of applicants, the line was moving forward rapidly. When he got closer to the front he could see why. There didn't appear to be a limit to the number of students that the relic could accommodate. Every second another student entered. He could see the green-haired second year that he'd previously met treating a student with a gash across his abdomen. His contract looked like a dandelion that was continuously blowing spores to the wounded. It was a contract Kane had never seen in a textbook before, meaning it was likely extremely rare. He also saw a large stone tablet with the names of the students that had successfully passed the test. So far over 1,000 students had entered, yet only 9 names were listed. Kane wondered if the order of the names meant anything. Was it the order in which they cleared the relic? Or was it a reflection of how high their individual scores were? After another 500 students entered the relic, and 5 more names appeared, he got his answer. The order of the names was most likely the ranking of their individual scores. He wished he knew how the score was determined. Is it timing-based? How few injuries they received? Their ability to cope with dangers? From some of the injuries he was seeing the students leave with, he could guess that there were spiritual creatures in there. Does how many we kill affect the score? There's no use in worrying. I'll just have to do my best. By the time more than 2,000 applicants had entered, there were only 21 names listed on the tablet. There were only 10 more people in front of him before it was his turn to enter. It'd take seconds for all of the students in front of him to enter the freestanding stone archway covered with intricate runes. Heart beating quickly, he turned back to wish the others good luck before also stepping into the entrance of the relic with his spear and armor already equipped. After a bright flash of light and a disorienting feeling, Cain felt a breeze on his face. He opened his eyes that he'd inadvertently closed and looked around. You call this an island? He was on a small patch of land in the middle of what looked like the ocean. He couldn't see any other land for as far as the eye could see. The land he was standing on was even smaller than the back of the turtle he had hitched a ride on previously. Maybe only 5 adults could lie down on it comfortably. In front of him, nailed to the island, was a flimsy-looking rope bridge floating on the surface of the water. The bridge extended far off into the distance, beyond what he could see, to what Cain assumed was his endpoint. Yeah. Real easy. Kai yelled mockingly at the instructor's previous description of the test. He was also confident that there were probably spiritual creatures waiting to attack him on this flimsy bridge. However, despite the seemingly daunting task, Cain found the prospect of being surrounded by water reassuring thanks to BEA's presence. The second he had entered the space and seen the water, he had immediately thrown her into the water as was his habit. He could sense that her splits had already covered the ocean for miles, her upgrade to red spiritual power being a huge boost to her abilities. He could already sense Bee running into some white-grade spiritual creatures, but they died within seconds. White-grade spiritual creatures could no longer even put up a fight against her. Not wanting to delay any longer in case the time taken affected his score, he began to cross the bridge at a steady pace to prevent falling off. Eventually, he reached a point where he could no longer see the land he entered on. He could sense through Bee that her splits had probably already killed over 100 white-grade spiritual creatures by this point. However, he hadn't seen even their shadow. All were killed far before he could even catch a glimpse of them. Cain now understood why the pass rate was so low. If those aquatic creatures were to all actually reach the bridge, it'd be like fighting a beast tied alone while on unsteady ground. Thankfully I have Bee. In certain environments she's practically a cheat. BEA's unique abilities rendered having a large number of low-level beasts useless. However, at some point among the white-grade spiritual creatures, some red-grade ones began to appear. The red-grade spiritual creatures that were weaker still died before they had a chance to actually attack Cain. However, they now got close enough that he could see their bodies. One of the more powerful ones, a red shark, even got close enough to try and bite Cain. Fortunately, it was still weakened by Bee and he was able to quickly dispatch it with a thrust of his spear into its forehead. This won't do. I don't want to be a sitting duck. Cain began to pick up the pace and ran across. Even when some of the spiritual beasts arrived at the bridge, they were often far behind him. Moreover, they often died before they could even begin to pursue him thanks to Bee. Those who had the intelligence to try and intercept him were still quite easy to take care of with a single strike to the head. However, once Cain was able to spot an endpoint far off in the distance, he received a signal from Bee that some creatures she couldn't kill were beginning to approach, orange grade. Stall them. Focus on impeding their senses and causing hallucinations. Forget the headaches. With her advancement to red grade and her increased proficiency with using her skills from hunting, Bee was now able to influence what kind of side effects she would induce, whereas previously the side effects were completely random and subject to the infected's own constitution. Fortunately, although Bee couldn't kill orange-grade spiritual creatures, inducing symptoms was no issue for her. Cain no longer could afford to be careful with his steps and began to sprint as fast as he could to his destination. Crash! When he was still a dozen meters away, a large tentacle rose out of the water and slapped in his direction, almost knocking him off the bridge. If he didn't have some armor covering him, he may have had to leave due to a serious injury right at that moment. Ugh. I can't afford to conserve anything at this point. While clutching the ropes of the bridge to stand back up, he injected his remaining spiritual power into his armor to induce the wide-range mental attack skill. Scree! The animal that attacked him, which looked like a giant orange squid with a single eye, began to screech and flail in pain as its mind was assaulted by both him and B. While it was distracted, he threw his spear into its large eye as deep as he could and then sprinted the remaining distance forward without stopping to retrieve his spear or see if his attack killed it. Seconds later he collapsed on solid ground. I did it. I did. It. Panting heavily, Cain was ejected from the space. He appeared in the same position a short distance from the stone arch that students were still entering. The line was much shorter now. After going through the test, Cain was amazed at the fact that even more than 10 recent high school graduates could pass. It was a testament to how deep the backgrounds and immense the talents of the students that could enter a top 5 college were. After all, it's not likely that any of them had a B to drastically reduce the number of attacking creatures before they reached the bridge. And there were even orange-grade spiritual creatures at the end lying in ambush. I wonder where I placed against such monsters, Cain thought, turning towards the tablet. Based on the current length of the line, Cain guessed that over 5,000 applicants had already entered. He looked at the bottom of the list that had an unfamiliar name next to the number 43 and guessed that probably no more than 50 applicants would pass at this rate. Not unless there were several stronger applicants at the end. Number 43 isn't me. Cain began to skin up the list, keeping an eye out for not only Bridges' name but also Addison's and Aiden's. When he reached the top 10, he didn't see his own name, or any of the other 3. His heart began to pound and instead of going up gradually, jumped immediately to the number 1 position with a small bit of hope. 1. Cain. His name looked out of place among all of the others with both a given and surname. Many had quite prestigious last names, signifying their statuses as top legacies. Yet it was his familiar name in the first-place position. People began to whisper and stare at him as he stood mouth agape in front of the tablet. But he could care less, he'd probably never see most of them again anyway. I'm number 1. I'm number 1. I'm number 1. It took all of his self-restraint to not start screaming his rank at the top of his lungs. However, at the thought that Bridges' name also wasn't on the tablet, he began to feel nervous. He went to where the green-haired second year and some other seniors were treating students and looked for Bridges' familiar figure. Nothing. He then began to look around the nearby campus grounds. Still nothing. Maybe he's still in there. Cain began to calm down at the prospect that Bridge hadn't failed. I had probably cleared it faster than most, so it makes sense that he's not out yet. I hope he makes it, but I really have no idea how he or the other applicants managed to pass. Cain unfortunately had no way of knowing the other methods applicants used to pass. While, like he thought, nobody had anything like B, all of the successful applicants were astonishing in their own way. If one had the power to monitor all of the trainees' admission tests, the method used by Addison and Aiden would likely be the most astonishing. Not due to some overwhelming ability being displayed, but rather because they were the only space with 2 applicants, while all of the others only had 1 each. How could they have accomplished this? Less than a minute after Addison entered the space, her eyes began to glow and her features began to look slightly more masculine until there was an unfamiliar individual with very androgynous beauty remaining. Suddenly a third and fourth leg extended from the body and a familiar figure stepped out, Aiden. Addison's space, which originally had only her, now had the complete pair of siblings. They both paused and looked around as though waiting for something, before releasing a relieved breath. This had truly been a gamble. They hadn't known if the space would eject one or both of them after doing this and rule them to have failed. Thankfully, as long as the method used is not a cheat item beyond the power level of the participant, any methods to pass will be allowed. So of course, the use of a gift, like the one the twins just demonstrated, would not disqualify them. Both of them began to move forward and fight with excellent coordination. With 2 people their exam just became much easier. In another space, an unfamiliar individual stood confidently on the beginning land mass looking around. He had blonde hair, green eyes, and looked like the stereotypical image of a handsome storybook prince. His very demeanor and equipment practically screamed his legacy status, and it was definitely a high-tier legacy family. He had on shining silver armor, with gold rimming around the edges. It was covered in at least 3 sigils, one more than is typical of 2-star equipment. To achieve an additional sigil beyond the level of the weapon, not only is a world-class blacksmith needed, but also the use of materials beyond the 2-star level must also be used. That is materials from orange-grade spiritual beasts and higher. Even the average legacy family wouldn't be able to bear using a higher-level material to make a 2-star armor. After understanding the situation, he summoned his contract. If Cain had been there, he would have immediately turned green with envy and jealousy. A dragon. A young one, only a little bigger than a large horse, but a dragon nonetheless. It had light green scales, and its wings were nearly 5 times its size. Clearly, it was a dragon species that prioritized flight speed over bodily strength. He climbed on its back before flying into the air. Most 1-star applicants would not have contracts that could support them in flying to their destination. However, the relic still seemed to be prepared for this eventuality, and the dragon was forced by a great pressure to lower onto the bridge. Taking the bridge was the only allowed method of passing the exam. An expression of embarrassment at the failed plan only flashed for a moment before he ordered his dragon to dash across the bridge with him on its back. Although not as advantageous as in the air, his dragon was at least gold quality. None of the lower quality white-grade beasts and red-grade beasts in the water even came close to him until he was at the final third of the bridge. Swipe. He narrowly dodged a stab from a trident in the hands of what looked like a purple human fused with an octopus lower body. He unsheathed his sword and began to input his red and orange-tinged spiritual power into the sigils. He must now go all out. He could defeat one orange-grade spiritual creature, but a whole horde of them is even beyond his capabilities. Unlike Cain, who had to restrain most of them so that he only really had to face the one lying in ambush near the exit. The majority of the students had to find a way to fight through or avoid the orange-grade attacks on their way to the exit. In another space, the performance of another examiner was also surprising. He had a gloomy-looking appearance with shoulder-length black hair partially covering his eyes. Unlike most contestants who would usually immediately summon their contracts or unsheath their weapons to prepare for battle, he began to strip off all of his clothes. But clenching in nervousness, he began to sprint across the bridge as a certain unmentionable body part flapped in the wind. He was quite fast and managed to avoid running into the majority of the white-grade beasts. When he occasionally did run into one, he did not choose to fight due to being weaponless. He would instead clench his butt cheeks as hard as possible before reappearing in a flash of pink spiritual power at the maximum point his eyes could see on the bridge. Clearly, this was another student who had already awakened a gift. However, there were obviously limitations on the number of times he could use it. Especially, since the color of his spiritual power indicated he was still at 1 star. When he could finally see the end, his nose had already started to bleed from overexertion. I would have maybe just dodged some of the earlier attacks instead of teleporting if I knew this bridge was so damn long. A giant tentacle of a orange-grade creature far stronger than him began to hurtle towards him. They don't even want to give us 1 stars a chance. But despite his words, his expression was calm. He could already see the exit. He emptied all of his remaining spiritual power to appear on the small body of land in the distance. And then fainted. Ugh. Cain was waiting near the stone archway for bridge to exit when his vision was suddenly assaulted by a naked man lying on the ground. Thankfully, he was face down. However, he could see a pool of blood spilling out from the front of his and spreading around the ground. Oh. There were shock screams from some individuals also waiting around, likely for their own friends who had entered. Thankfully for the passed-out applicant though, there was no longer any line, so less than 50 students were waiting by the gate. Most had left in grief after failing to pass or to immediately head off to try and make either the Supernova or First Celestial Academy exams taking place soon. Thankfully, Cain doesn't have to worry about trying to enter another top 5 college. Seeing that nobody else was stepping forward to help, Cain decided to call the green-haired senior he was familiar with to examine the student. After the naked boy was covered and removed from the area to undergo a medical examination, the surroundings returned to their previous calm. There were currently still thousands of students inside the relic trying to pass the test, and another would be eliminated every few seconds. With each passing second, Cain wasn't sure if he should be anxious that Bridge had not passed yet, or if he should be happy that he hadn't been eliminated yet. Come on, Bridge. A scene so similar to the affinity ceremony, but now their roles were reversed. The moment Bridge entered the relic, he knew it would not be as easy as the teacher described. However, he had trained and prepared intensely for this very test for months. Not to mention all of the hours, resources, and money the Wolfblood Dojo invested into him. He knows that it wasn't purely out of the goodness of their heart. He needs to enter a top 5 college so that it validates their training program and their investment pays off. After entering, he released his initial contract, Lady. She was much larger now than when they first met. She would have been large enough to support a lighter contractor if she was not bound to the heavy Bridge. Thankfully, the dojo had already analyzed Bridge's weaknesses and knew that his lack of speed was a problem. Therefore, to combat this in a short time, they had also equipped him with an enchanted light armor that, when injected with spiritual power, would have his weight while decreasing his wind resistance. It was one of 3 armors prepared by the dojo in the space ring so that he could deal with a variety of scenarios. After activating the armor, Bridge boarded Lady before she sped off at full speed across the bridge. As a hurricane known for their speed, none of the spiritual creatures even got close to them until towards the end of the rope bridge. That also happened to be when Bridge's spiritual power was beginning to bottom out and the lightning effects of the armor were fading. Whimper. Lady could no longer support his immense weight and her legs began to shake. Bridge immediately jumped off while patting Lady to thank her for her hard work. They had managed to cross the majority of the bridge without having to fight. Now that they could see the exit in the distance, he would need to fight the rest of the way on foot. Bridge removed a heavy sword from the space ring. Thankfully, he had gone hunting with a few of the trainers in preparation for the exam. However, those were all land-based spiritual creatures. He wasn't used to fighting on water against fins and tentacles. He cut off a tentacle from a red-grade creature reaching toward him and began to steadily move his way forward, sending out another heavy swing of his sword with each step. Ha! 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 Looking behind Bridge, there was a long line of corpses and chopped-off body parts. He could finally see the end. He stepped carefully toward the end of the bridge. He didn't see any more spiritual creatures moving towards him. Thwack. Ayo. Bridge was thrown into the water by a heavy blow. He could hear Lady screaming in fear for him as a tentacle wrapped around his ankle and tried to drag him deeper into the water. Bridge tried to slash at the tentacle gripping him, but its rubbery texture kept bouncing the blade off. His brain worked in overdrive. Using his mind was not his strong suit, but the trainers at the dojo had emphasized the importance of staying calm in desperate situations to find a solution. Suddenly, his eyes flashed with light as an idea came to mind. He called out Princess. Due to her young age, he hadn't expected to use her at all during the test, however her abilities were exactly what he needed at the moment. He held her firmly since she couldn't swim, and pressed her paw against the tentacle while directing her to channel as much ice attribute energy as she could muster into a small area. Normally, the attacks of a white-grade spiritual creature would be useless, but the strength of an A-level skill allowed her to freeze over a small area the size of her paw. It was an area so small that it couldn't even be considered as dealing a substantial injury to the enemy, but it was exactly what Bridge needed at the moment. The moment the tentacle froze over, Bridge recalled Princess and hurriedly slammed down with his sword at the frozen-over spot. Thankfully, this time it shattered instead of rebounding his sword. Finally free, he swam as fast as he could back to the bridge and clung to it. Lady was still there waiting for him. Seeing that he had expended pretty much all of his energy, she used the last of hers to pull him out of the water and then the few remaining steps to land. Finished, she collapsed next to him. "You did great, Lady," Bridge said with a weak pat on her head before recalling her to the star space to rest. The next moment he felt the grass he was lying on change to a hard rocky surface. And then the familiar face of his best friend was smiling down at him. "Welcome back. Congratulations on passing." Kane had been monitoring the number of names on the tablet since he had exited the relic, so he immediately noticed that the last name on the list was one rank lower, meaning that someone else had exited. Nervously he scanned for Bridge's name. This would be at least the 10th time he had gone through this process after seeing a change in ranks. Fortunately, he did find Bridge's name this time. Similar to his, it lacked a surname and was easy to spot. Additionally, it was towards the end of the list, at number 42. But no matter, at least he had passed. "You passed," Kane repeated with a wide smile as he helped Bridge up. Bridge also smiled at him as he caught his breath. "Thanks to you," Bridge relayed what had happened in the relic and how he had needed to rely on Princess at the end to escape. Kane was relieved that he could be of help in some way. It wasn't long until the final applicant exited the relic and their final rankings were confirmed. There were 52 successful applicants. Nobody surpassed Kane's score until the end and he managed to finish in first place. Bridge moved down one spot to rank 43. Both of the twins Addison and Aiden also passed, and were ranked at an impressive 13 and 14. Strangely, they exited their respective exams at the exact same time. Their group of 4 met up. The other 2 looked surprised at Kane's ranking, while Bridge looked as though he had expected it. He had endless faith in Kane. The 52 future attendees followed one of the senior students to an administration building where Assistant Professor Nightingale was waiting for them in a large meeting room. They all took a seat while she began to speak. Her voice was much warmer now that she was speaking to officially accepted students of the college. Congratulations on your successful completion of the Dark Moon College exam. I will now begin the information session. Under each of your seats is a registration package. You will be required to fill it out with your personal information. Additionally, there is a course timetable of all the required courses for first-year students, as well as the available times for open courses you may take as electives. Use that information to register for the courses and times that work best for you and match your goals. Keep in mind though that some required courses are only available at one time and all of them have mandatory attendance. Kane flipped through the information package. Thankfully, there were only 3 required courses for first years: Introduction to Spiritual Skills, which Professor Nightingale teaches, Wilderness Survival, and Advanced Knowledge for Beast Tamers. The rest of the minimum of 5 courses that students must take each year need to be filled with electives. However, Kane doesn't have a choice. He already knew that his spare time would be filled with the courses for his evolutionary planner major. However, as he flipped through the booklet, he was unable to find any planner courses in the course list provided. He couldn't possibly plan his schedule without knowing those class times. Not be provided. Please fill out the required forms tonight and return them to this administration building by tomorrow at 4 p.m. That will be all. We look forward to seeing you all at the start of the new semester in 3 weeks. Are there any questions? Kane tuned back in to only catch the tail end of the information session. He'd have to ask Bridge if he missed anything important later on. Firstly, he had a more pressing question that needed answers. Kane stood up. Yes. There were no evolutionary planner courses in the course list you provided. I was wondering where I could get that information. I'm sorry. The planner courses are only available to those in that major, so students of the beast taming faculty cannot register for them. She looked as though she had expected that question. It seems like planner courses are a common elective that students want to take. After all, evolving your contract will increase their upper limit of strength. Most people hire a planner to help with this, but having some basic knowledge would also be helpful. Seeing that she was going to leave her answer at that and turn to another student with his hand raised, Kane quickly cut in. I know. I am a double major and was also admitted into the planner major. However, they haven't yet provided me a course list, so I can't fill out this schedule. He had received his exam score, which was an expected perfect score, and the acceptance offer from Dark Moon's planner major, which he had listed as his first choice program when registering for the academic exam, while he had been condensing his second star. He had called to accept the offer the night he woke up, but they had not yet sent him any information package. Even if they did, it would be at New Beginnings Orphanage and he wouldn't have a chance to read it before he had to fill out this timetable for tomorrow. At his words, everyone in the room turned to him in shock. Majoring in both the beast taming and planner majors at a top 5 college was extremely rare. Not only because they were both the 2 hardest programs to gain admittance to, they both had some of the most stressful workloads. Only a masochist would want to take both on. The twins looked even more shocked. After all, they were one of the few individuals in the room that had identified Kane as the top-ranked student for the relic. Now he's saying that was also entering the planner major. Is he a monster? They shared the same horrified thought. Well, your circumstances are pretty unusual. You can follow one of our senior volunteers after this information session to the administration office for the planning department. They should be able to register you for courses in advance. Relieved that his issue was taken care of, Kane sat back down while nodding. Ahem, any more questions? A blond princely-looking guy in the front row stood up. Yes. I'd like to know how exactly these rankings by the relic were decided. Not every examiner that passed was pleased with their ranking. The blonde legacy obviously being one of them. While some, like Bridge and the Naked Teen, were just grateful to have passed. Others had a certain expectation for the ranking. Looking around, Kane could see several cocky, prideful, and unconvinced expressions in the crowd. He smiled bitterly, determined to keep his ranking a secret for Nott in case he's challenged to a fight on the way to the hotel. A frontal duel is really not his strong suit. The professor seemed to have expected this question. After all, most of the students trying to enter a top 5 college would have a high level of pride. The ranking of an applicant is based on a variety of factors that are combined into a single score. The main 3 factors are the time it takes to clear the exam, the number of beasts killed during the exam, and the condition of the applicant at the time the relic is cleared. For example, the last-placed applicant was within the top 10 for clearance time, but killed no spiritual creatures and was unconscious by the time he reached the exit. If he had not been in a relic, and instead in real life, then he would have been in an extremely dangerous situation. After all, in reality he would likely still receive attacks from aquatic creatures on land. Seeing that the blonde teen was still unconvinced, she continued, "Mr. Lysander, you performed exceptionally well." "Oh. Lysander. That was the last name of the second-placed applicant. He also has the last name as the royal family, no wonder he's so unconvinced." Kane was even more determined to keep his identity a secret. The professor continued, "You were within the top 3 for both speed and ending condition and the top 5 for the number of beasts killed, slaying an impressive 50 red-grade spiritual creatures, and 2 orange-grade spiritual creatures." The other applicants began to chatter at the impressive results. The blonde raised his chin cockily at the shocked whispers. "Any other year and your score would have likely placed you first. Therefore you can be extremely proud of your results." She turned to the other student that had already stood up. Seeing that she wasn't going to share anything more, Lysander interjected again. "So what was the first place's scores?" "Wow. He's really not letting this go." Kane was starting to feel both flattered and nervous. But he was also curious. What was the reason for his high score? He seriously doubted he was the fastest. The professor's eye twitched in irritation after being cut off a second time. The first-placed applicant was only in the top 10 for both timing and condition, but they ranked first for kills, and the gap with second place was substantial. In total there are 800 spiritual creatures in each relic test. 600 white-grade spiritual creatures, 180 red-grade, and 20 orange-grade spiritual creatures. Although, only a small fraction of them would actually attack the applicant at a time, ensuring that more applicants will not actually have to meet even 5% of the total number of beasts if they move fast enough. The first-ranked applicant killed all 780 white and red-grade spiritual creatures in the relic space, and 1 orange-grade spiritual creature. Shocked silence. Even Kane was shocked. He had only seen a tiny fraction of all the spiritual creatures B had killed. However, after he thought about it, it made sense. Given enough time, B would be able to kill anything red-grade and below, therefore all of the water BEA splits inhabited as they spread out probably became a land of death, even the areas of water far away from him. Kane was also pleasantly surprised to discover that his final blow had managed to finish off the orange-grade spiritual creature. He had lost his spear to deal that blow, so he appreciated the boost to his score. The twins and Bridge, the only ones to know the face of the first-place individual, turned to Kane in shock. How was such a killing spree even possible? The thoughts of everyone in the room were pretty uniform at that moment. Even the professor had been shocked when she read the report. Even the use of poison wouldn't be able to achieve that effect since it would just be diluted by the water. It'd have to be a poison far exceeding the level of the applicant, and the applicant would have been ejected for cheating, not scored first place. Nobody could figure out how this Kane had done it. Lysander sat down stiffly in resignation. Many of the other students who also previously had unconvinced expressions, now looked to accept the rankings. Seeing that there were no more interruptions, Professor Nightingale answered 2 more questions before ending the meeting. "I will meet you back at the hotel." Kane left behind those words before heading to one of the senior volunteers waiting by the exit. The twins still had not fully recovered from their shock. "You didn't tell us he was such a monster, Bridge." "Ahem, well I don't like to brag," he said humbly, trying not to show that he was just as shocked by Kane's results. Kane followed the senior across campus to a separate administration building. After informing the staff of his circumstances, they also provided him with a registration package similar to the beast taming major and said that they would allow him to register for the courses he would be taking early. Thankfully there was no conflict in the class times of both majors, but it'd be a packed schedule. Most students only have to take 5 courses. 3 required courses for their major, and 2 optional ones of their choice. He had to take 3 required courses for the planner major as well: Introduction to Evolution, Evolution Practicum, and Introduction to Evolutionary Research. Meaning that he had to deal with one more course than the average college student. When Kane arrived back at the hotel, he immediately went to Bridge's room. He thought that he'd find him still in a celebratory mood, but he appeared slightly downtrodden. Confused by the atmosphere, Kane entered and closed the door behind him. "What's wrong? Are you having trouble picking an elective?" He guessed that there was some issue with his registration package, since that's what he was staring at. "Ah, you're back." "No, I already picked my electives with the Addison and Aiden. We're taking a spiritual material cooking course and a material processing course." Kane nodded. Those would have been the 2 courses he would have recommended for Bridge. Bridge wasn't strong in the traditional academic subjects like history or science. One course teaches the most valuable parts of spiritual beasts and how to extract them without damaging them or reducing the quality. The other course shows the proper way to cook the edible parts of spiritual creatures in a way that maximizes the preservation of the remnant spiritual power and beneficial effects in dishes. "Then, why do you look so gloomy?" "It's nothing." "Strange." Bridge usually wouldn't hesitate to share something that bothered him with Kane. Kane sat next to him and looked at what he was holding. He had expected him to be staring at the course list, but he was looking at the form where they just had to fill in their basic information. "What's wrong? Tell me." He nudged Bridge's shoulder. Bridge slowly opened his mouth. "We were the only ones without a last name. Addison, Aiden, that arrogant blonde guy, they all have families. And they all have a family name to show where they come from." Ah. It hadn't really bothered Kane. But unlike Kane, Bridge never knew what it was like to have a biological family and a family name. He could understand why he'd envy it. "Let's make one now." "Huh. Let's choose a last name for ourselves now. Be officially brothers with the same last name." Bridge suddenly was filled with nervous excitement. "What do we choose?" "Well, as you said, last names represent your roots. They can be derived from a hereditary occupation in your family. For example, if your father and your father's father and so on were all blacksmiths, at one point your family may have taken on a last name based on that, like Jack Smith." Bridge looked awkward. "I don't think that would apply to us." Kane nodded. "It can also be based off of the name of a prominent ancestor of yours. Like if you had a famous grandfather named John, you might pick the last name Johnson, to show you are descended from him. Still doesn't apply to us. Is there a method of coming up with a last name that doesn't depend on knowing who your parents are?" I was getting to that. We can also pick a last name after a unique feature. For example, 3 of our empire's founders supposedly picked their last names based off of their gifts. Several legacy families also have last names based off the most common affinity inherited by their lineage. For example, while Heather Frost didn't awaken during the affinity ceremony, many members of her family supposedly have ice attribute affinities. Bridge began to nod. "I don't have a gift, but maybe I could pick a last name based on my affinity. Who knows, I may even end up guessing a last name the same as my birth parents." "We said we'd pick the same last name, didn't we?" "I don't have a wolf affinity." "Ahem, that's correct, please continue." Another method is to base the last name after a prominent personal characteristic, physical or personality-wise, or some kind of aspiration. Supposedly, founder Blackheart took on that last name after enemies of the kingdom began to call him Blackhearted for his unwillingness to spare anyone in battle. Clearly, he took it as compliment though. Our personalities are really different and we look nothing alike. I guess we could make a common last name based off of a goal we both share, but what?" Bridge pondered. "Finally, a last name could be based off of where you're from. Which is the option I was thinking we should go with. Like Kane and Bridge, Bright Star after Bright Star City. It could work, but it feels a little awkward to take the name of our city as our last name." Kane's brow twitched in annoyance. "No. I was thinking in terms of the orphanage, New Beginnings Orphanage. We could take on the last name Newman. It's not that unusual of a last name, and it has meaning to us. Director Silas took us in and gave us a family. It makes sense to take our name from the orphanage we call home." Seeing that Bridge was remaining silent with his head down, Kane thought he wasn't convinced, so he continued, it can also have an additional meaning that we are now embarking on new lives as beast tamers at a top 5 college if you'd prefer. Bridge raised his head with tears in his eyes. No. I prefer the first meaning. We should have a last name based on our family. The members of the orphanage, do you think the other members of the orphanage will also consider taking it as a last name? Kane smiled. We can ask them when get back home. After they had filled out their registration packets, now with last names added, they went down to dinner with the celebratory atmosphere restored. The cafeteria was much emptier since the majority of students had failed and then immediately left the city to head to another exam. Therefore, it was easy to spot the twins already seated and eating. After filling their plates, they went over to them. Thankfully, as they ate, they started to discuss some of what Kane missed during the information session earlier when he tuned out. Kane already knew that all tuition fees at top 5 colleges were waived in appreciation for their being the Empire's greatest talent pool. Additionally, they will receive a basic amount of school credits every month to provide food for their contracts. Each additional contract also comes with an increase in allowance. However, some contracts have more rare nutritional needs, so students are encouraged to talk to the resource manager once school starts to see if the school can provide for any special needs. That got Kane thinking. He probably won't have the time once school starts to go hunting continuously to feed B. However, he may be able to purchase the brains of high-level spiritual creatures. While not as good as the fresh thing, it should be able to allow B to grow while saving him time from having to hunt himself. Additionally, he finally found out one of the purposes for the entrance test ranking. Their room assignments once school starts will be dependent on their ranking. Bridge looked sad at the prospect that he and Kane would not be neighbors or roommates. While Kane groaned. His roommate will likely end up being that blonde prince. The twins giggled at his suffering. Don't worry. You won't have to share a room with him, Addison comforted him. Well, that's one relief. Unlike the other students that have roommates and are separated into men's only and women's only dorms. The top 5 students of each year live in a separate co-ed building. Aiden continued, I heard that each floor in the building is for a separate year, so your room may not even be that close to his. Kane was immediately excited. Sweet. No wonder some of the students looked unhappy by their ranks. I wasn't expecting that kind of benefit. Apparently, there are even more benefits throughout the year to having a higher ranking. That's why the future ranking tests will be intense. People are desperate to even go up one spot in rank. I'm sorry, what? Another ranking test? This is the first he's heard about this. Addison scoffed, you didn't think the entrance test rankings were permanent, did you? Students will be re-ranked every 3 months. How are we re-ranked? Of course, by battling one another one-on-one. You better protect that number 1 spot well, because everyone in our year will be coming for it, she laughed in a somewhat threatening manner. I'm screwed. Even after going to bed and waking up the next morning, all that Kane could think about was the re-ranking 3 months after school started. He did everything from eating breakfast, going to the college registration office, and booking the train tickets with the demeanor of a mindless zombie. He was in a complete daze. Bridge finally couldn't take it anymore when Kane almost wandered straight onto the train tracks in front of an incoming train. Grabbing Kane back by the collar, he shook him. What is going on with you? Ah. Sorry, Bridge, I've just been a little distracted. A little distracted. I overlooked when your fork kept missing your mouth as you tried to eat this morning. I also didn't think it was a big deal when you almost walked straight into a streetlight on the way here. But just now you almost got hit by a train due to your carelessness. Not even a 2-star beast tamer can withstand a train. Snap out of it. Kane was embarrassed. Instead of worrying about getting beaten up by his fellow students in a few months, his carelessness may cause him to die before then. Kane could now form a contract with a second spiritual creature. But it would need to be one that could actually put up a fight in a frontal duel. B was powerful, but her strength relied a lot on environmental advantages and the opponent not being able to attack her, while Kane often just avoided the attacks. Kane wasn't sure if they'd be allowed to attack him in the arena. But even if they couldn't attack him or spot B, without water B could do nothing to them either. The result would probably be a stunningly boring duel consisting of the opponent's contract pacing around trying to find Kane's contract while Kane could do nothing. He needed a contract that could take the initiative to fight and not just lay a trap waiting for the opponent to fall into it. However, he currently had no leads for such a contract. He had assumed that there was something he could bind within that dead egg, that also may have killed that pack of shadow leopards. However, no matter how much he inputted his spiritual power into the egg, he couldn't sense anything in there he could form a contract with. Also, whatever was in the egg seems to have fully died by this point, as the already extremely faint pull was now completely gone. He guessed that whatever was in the egg was a split similar to what B produces. He'd need to find the original microorganism to form a contract with it. However, even if he does eventually find it, there's no guarantee it will have better frontal combat abilities than B. Sigh. Once he was settled into his private room on the train, Kane flopped onto the bed distraught. With a feeling of it being his final hope, Kane turned to the system. It was supposed to be his greatest cheat but hasn't demonstrated much value yet. He hoped that the shop, which had refreshed twice by now, would have something good. He had successfully completed the following missions. Advancing to 2 stars, 100 GP received. -1 spiritual contract advancing to red grade, 100 GP received. Entering the beast taming major at a college, reward variable by college ranking, entered a top 5 college and received 500 GP. Taking the academic admissions exam, reward variable by placement, scored within the top 10 in the Empire with a perfect score and received 200 GP. Meaning that he has collected 900 GP out of the 1000 GP required to upgrade the system. However, if something could increase his battle strength in a short time, he wouldn't mind spending some of his GP and delaying the next system upgrade. After all, with an increase in strength, he could better complete future missions. Even now, he could easily complete several of the missions to defeat red-grade spiritual creatures now that he and B had both upgraded. Unfortunately, the beasts in the relic were not real and could not count towards his mission progress. With a faint hope, Kane clicked on the system shop. Exchangeable items available. A custom 2-star weapon, 500 GP. A random silver quality spiritual creature egg, 500 GP. Basic affinity radar, 200 GP. Kane could exchange for a customizable 2-star weapon. Considering that he had lost his main weapon, this wouldn't be a bad option to increase his strength. Not only will he get a 2-star enchanted weapon, but he'd even be able to customize the sigils imprinted into it. Therefore, he'd be able to produce the perfect weapon for himself that he may not be able to obtain in reality without the system. Not to mention, he was extremely curious about how this customization process occurs. Is there a list of available sigils and designs for him to choose from? Or is it completely up to his own imagination? However, it does not solve his most pressing concern about filling his 2nd star space with a contract suitable for one-on-one fights against other beast tamers. The silver quality egg was even more useless. What hatches from it is completely random, and while he doesn't know where a spiritual microbe like B originated, he seriously doubts it was from an egg. So what hatches will most likely not even be suitable for his, or even Bridges, affinity. The only thing that may help him is the basic radar. According to the item description, when activated it will provide the user with the location of all spiritual creatures that meet his affinity requirements within range for 24 hours. This was almost exactly what he needed. In fact, it fit his needs so well that he was suspicious. When has his system ever been so generous? What was the catch? However, he really had no better alternative. Resolutely he exchanged 200 GP for the basic radar. Currently, Kane was on a train, so he did not activate the radar. It was only valid for 24 hours, and even if it did detect something he could contract outside, what could he do about it? Jump outside a train moving over 100 miles per hour? He's already died once, he's not in a rush to experience it a second time. When Kane was scrolling through the mission board, something bothered him. There were also missions related to the Beast Tamer entrance exam, specifically his performance on it. One was to rank within the top 5 of entrance and would grant a corresponding amount of GP depending on his ranking, up to a max of 1000 GP. However, it had a pending symbol next to it. He already ranked first in the entrance exam, and should naturally be first among all entrants. If the system had just rewarded him now, he could upgrade the system while searching for his next contract. Sigh. Well, at least he could look forward to a nice reward on the first day of school at least. Looking through the other missions, he also saw that each time he completed the re-ranking battles in the college, he would also receive similarly lucrative rewards. Nothing else he could do while on the train, Cain spent the next 2 days traveling back to the southern region, alternating between using the planetarium and feeding B. However, when his consciousness was in the planetarium, he suddenly felt a pulling sensation outside of his body. He snapped his eyes open and immediately ran to the window. Trees, trees, and more trees. There were absolutely no distinguishing features for where they were or anything special about the area, but he was certain he had felt it. The pull towards a suitable contract target. Unfortunately, the feeling was rapidly fading as the train sped away. Cain really was beginning to consider the likelihood of surviving jumping out of the train, but forced himself to remain calm and not do anything rash. Instead, he went to Bridge's room next door to inform him that he would not be going with him back to the orphanage right away. Bridge was confused. Why would you choose to stay in Starfire instead of coming home? We still have to finish packing. Also, once we are at the college, it'll probably be nearly a year before we can see them all again. We should spend as much time with them as we can. I know. But I have no choice. Remember how I told you that I'm not 100% sure what my affinity is, and that it's hard to find something that I can bind? Well, I felt the pull from my affinity just now. I need to go see what it is. Bridge got silent, before raising his head. Well, I'm obviously coming too. I did say I'd help you as thanks for giving me Princess. Princess was a gift, you don't need to repay me. And I don't exactly know what I'm running into, it could be dangerous. I know. But we're family, and it's because I know it could be dangerous that I won't let you leave me behind. Cain wanted to continue to refuse because he didn't want Bridge to be in danger due to him, but he could tell that Bridge would still follow him stubbornly. Not to mention, although he hated to admit it, his capabilities without water around were severely reduced, and where he felt the pull there was absolutely no water that he could see. He really did need Bridge's help. Giving in, Cain accepted his offer and returned back to his room. When thinking about how he'd fight without water around, he was reminded that he doesn't currently have a weapon. Of his 700 GP remaining, he'd need to use 500 GP to purchase the customizable weapon from the system. From 900 GP to 200 GP, Cain was in tears. I can't wait until school starts and I can get my 1000 GP for ranking first. After completing the purchase, he was brought to a customization page. There were several shadowy silhouettes of a variety of weapons. Sword, dagger, short sword, shield, axe, spear, hammer, and more. Despite originally mostly using daggers and short swords, Cain had gotten used to using a spear in the past few months, and he also liked the extended reach it provided. Therefore, he selected the figure of a spear. After making his choice, he was brought to another screen asking him to select the weapon's attributes. Usually, the attributes of the weapon would be determined by the materials it was made out of, therefore attributes that were rarer in spiritual creatures would also obviously result in those attributes being rarer in weapons. It was very luxurious to get to select his desired attribute at whim. However, as Cain scrolled, he began to realize that sometimes too much choice is not a good thing. The long list of attributes had common ones such as earth, water, and fire. It also had attributes that Cain knew were quite rare, like the mental attribute and shadow attribute. However, there were attributes listed that he hadn't even known existed. Holy attribute, evil attribute, life attribute, death attribute. Although he could kind of guess from the names, he wasn't 100% sure what those attributes entailed. However, he was still tempted to pick them just out of curiosity. After all, something with a death attribute couldn't possibly be too weak, right? Cain was originally planning to just make an upgraded model of the spear he lost, but now his mind has opened up to many more possibilities. He needed to think critically about his desired combat style and the sigils that would best complement it. The perfect weapon for him wasn't necessarily the strongest in raw power. A powerful and rare attribute may not be what was best for him at this point in time. Especially if he wasn't familiar with its effects. Therefore, he reluctantly disregarded the attributes he was unfamiliar with and chose to only select from those he could already predict how they contribute to his combat style. His original spear was of a poison attribute. Not because the spear itself possessed any poison, but because it used the materials from a poisonous spiritual creature that, when combined with the necessary sigils, leads to the efficient ejection of poison from the spear's tip. Technically, this injection effect could be obtained using the materials of any attribute with enough skill. Phenios had likely used the remnants of an injection mechanism from the spiritual creature he used to make the spear to make up for the skills he lacked. Cain would like a similar injection mechanism so that he could show some combat effectiveness on land, but he didn't think picking the poison attribute should be necessary to achieve this. After all, although he has his gripes with the system, it should have more skill than a blacksmith apprentice. Cain also disregarded the mental attribute. He already had a mental attribute armor, and with a mental attribute, he felt another weapon with this attribute would be redundant. While he was looking through the different attributes, he was intrigued by a combination attribute that he had never considered before. If this attribute worked as he thought, then it could completely change his combat style, but for the better, allowing him to have many more options and the ability to take on multiple opponents even on land. Combination attributes are born from the combination of two or more other attributes. For example, the mist attribute that Cain was interested in would need to be produced from the materials of a spiritual creature with both water and wind attributes. The result would be water droplets suspended in the air. Looking at this attribute, Cain wondered, could be perhaps float inside the mist's water droplets. Normally, in water, bee infects others by going up their nose to their brain. Although, she can invade using other locations like the mouth and cuts. The nose is her preferred method. Wouldn't the same effect be achieved from breathing in mist? It would also make BEA's usage incredibly more versatile if he only had to wait for his prey to take a breath in the mist he created. Cain had not seen a back button to go back to the previous screen for selecting a weapon type, therefore he was going to operate under the belief that all decisions were final. Hoping that he won't come to regret his decision, he selected the mist attribute. He was brought to another screen with two empty squares and a third square with a plus symbol in the center. He assumed the empty boxes were meant to contain the sigils with the effects he wanted. Clicking on the first box, a long list of possible sigils for the attribute he selected appeared. When he saw an intricate blue sigil resembling a cloud, he had an idea that this was the effect he desired. However, he wanted the description to be sure. It's not as though he was a blacksmith and knew what they all meant. System, please place a simplified description of the effects of each sigil next to their image. I don't want to play guessing games for something so important. Thankfully, although the system did not reply to his words, it still followed his request. Next to the sigil he was staring at was now a description of its effect. When injected with spiritual power, the weapon will produce a dense mist to obscure the vision of opponents. Exactly what I wanted. Although I won't be using this effect just to obscure vision. For the second slot, he selected the non-attribute specific sigil that would allow a poison or other liquid to be stored within the spear for injection. Similar to his previous weapon. With this sigil, he could ensure that BEA splits will be injected into every droplet in the mist, instead of just tossing B into the air and hoping for the best. Finally, Cain turned to the third box with a plus symbol, assuming that it was an option for a third sigil. Cain was excited. Any weapon with one more sigil than its level would be incredibly expensive to produce, having high requirements on the materials used and the blacksmith. However, when he clicked the square, a message appeared requesting that he pay an additional 200 GP to unlock a third sigil. Of course, Cain grumbled. Doing this would completely clear out all of the GP he had earned, but a stronger weapon would help with completing missions to obtain even more GP. Looking at the expense as an investment, he eventually decided to purchase the option for a third sigil. He already had an effect in mind from the sigils he had previously seen, but the two he selected just ranked higher in importance. He had once read that high-level spiritual creatures with dual water and wind attributes use the mist they produce to create illusions and disorient opponents. Obviously, such a powerful effect as creating illusions would not be possible for a mere 2-star weapon. However, he did see a sigil earlier that would allow him to manipulate the shape and movement of the mist instead of it spreading out in an uncontrollable cloud around him. Now that he can control the symptoms she causes with infection, this sigil might have a great synergy with BEA's ability to distort thinking and cause hallucinations to further confuse opponents. After all 3 sigils he wanted were selected, a 2D image of a furnace appeared. The spear silhouette, the name of the attribute he selected, and his desired sigils all flew into the furnace, and then a chibi version of Cain with a blacksmith's hammer appeared next to the furnace to begin working on the spear. Are the animations really necessary? Can't you just materialize my spear instantly? What would be the fun in doing so? And this is fun. Cain almost felt sorry for the system. It was so bored that chibi blacksmiths were its idea of entertainment. Whatever. Do what you want. A minute later, Kane received a notification that his weapon was ready and he wanted to shout from excitement as it appeared in front of him. When they arrived at Starfire City's train station an hour and a half later, Kane was a lot more confident with a dependable weapon by his side. If anything, he was in a rush to go into the wild and give its effects a test run. However, before he could do so he had to let the train staff know that he and Bridge would not be returning. They wouldn't be able to receive even a partial refund, but he still had to let the staff know for safety's sake. The train is large and fast enough that 99% of spiritual creatures would be obliterated if they stood in its way. However, the remaining 1% are the absolute pinnacle in strength. Monsters that can cause natural disasters with their skills. Although unlikely for the train to be attacked by such a creature, it has happened in the past. In the slim chance that the train would be attacked on the way to Brightstar City, he would not want to be responsible for any staff or rescuing beast tamers to get hurt or delayed from helping others because they were looking for him on the train, not knowing that he had already disembarked. Therefore, it was standard practice to inform train staff of your whereabouts if you will not be where they expect in the event of an emergency. Before setting off they would need to pack various supplies. They hadn't planned for a trip into the wilderness when they had left for the entrance exam. After receiving directions to a nearby shopping center, they purchased the necessary supplies. Thankfully, Bridge still had the space ring to carry all of their supplies and weapons. When they were about to leave, Kane spotted beautifully designed bracelets in the window. He imagined the grievances of his younger siblings after missing out on time with him and Bridge before they left for college. He called over Bridge and they began to pick out bracelets they felt would match their younger siblings. They had also picked out bracelets they liked for themselves. There was also an option to customize the bracelets, so they decided to add their new names. After contemplating for a while, they also decided to add blank nameplates to their siblings' bracelets that they could engrave with their names, and potentially a shared last name, if they choose. The bracelets would take a few days to finish, so they paid half of the bill in advance and would pay the rest when they came back from the wilderness. After buying all the necessary supplies, he and Bridge headed towards the eastern gate of the city, the direction the train had come from. The plan was to follow the train tracks back towards the direction of Dark Moon City until he hopefully felt something again. I felt the pull nearly 2 hours ago. So based on the speed of the train, that position was around 130 to 150 miles from the city. Kane gulped. Even with the improved constitution of a beast tamer, walking that far would take at least 3 days. Fortunately, based on the massive size of the Empire, far larger than even the largest continents back on Earth, it was common for individuals to rent spiritual creatures to help with traveling. At a certain level, most beast tamers would have made sure to have at least one suitable mount. However, not everyone had the opportunity to do so, whether due to their talent limiting their number of contracts, or their affinity not being suitable to form a contract with a mount. The two headed to what looked like stables near the gate and managed to rent 2 black iron, white-grade mounts, Knight Mares. They were a pitch-black horse species without much, if any, combat power. However, their pitch-black coats allowed them to blend seamlessly into the darkness of night. Additionally, although not the fastest species, they were well known for their endurance and ability to carry heavy loads. They were the chosen carriers for merchants carrying cargo on long-distance trips. With a mount, they may be able to reach the designated area within 2 days, or by tomorrow night if they didn't rest at night or run into any attacks. They took out their armors and weapons from Bridge's space ring in order to respond to any sudden attacks. When they were fully prepared, they then mounted their rides and set off. Bridge kept glancing at Kane's spear from the corner of his eye. He could tell that it was of extremely high quality, but he couldn't figure out when Kane had bought it. He had left Dark Moon weaponless, and then when they arrived at the southern region he had given him that spear to store. "Did you buy that spear from a merchant on the train? It looks really high quality." Kane just nodded awkwardly. He couldn't come up with a better story. Thankfully, Bridge just accepted his words and didn't question him further. Majority of the journey was uneventful. Which was unfortunate for Kane since he was hoping to complete some of the hunting missions on the way. They had only received a single attack from a red-grade spiritual creature, a lightning attribute bird-type shock, which Kane was able to easily dispatch with a quick thrust of his spear to its head when it swooped towards him. He hadn't even needed to test any of the spear's effects. Around the 7th hour into their trip he saw several prints and guessed that a group of spiritual creatures may be nearby. Wanting to test the spear's effects he told Bridge to wait there and followed the prints to a clearing where a group of 7 red foxes were playing around. He could feel the rise in temperature even from where he stood. Ignifoxes. A bronze-quality species. Given that they were all adults, they should all have red-grade spiritual power. If Cain eliminated this entire group, he should be able to almost complete the mission of hunting 10 red-grade creatures. Slowly creeping towards the clearing, he inputted his spiritual power into the spear, causing a dense cloud to form, which he directed towards the playing foxes. Immediately, the foxes stopped their antics and began to group together vigilantly. B was already in the cloud and had quickly managed to infiltrate the group when they breathed in the mist. Yes. It works. Then Cain began to experiment with something else he had wanted to try. He told B to focus on interfering with the fox's senses and causing hallucinations. While she did so, Cain tried his best to manipulate the mist into denser shapes in some spots, trying to make them think that there was the location of the attacker. It just looked like a denser blob of mist. It's harder than I thought to create shapes. Cain wanted to continue experimenting, but the foxes all died within a minute. Asterisk ding. Host has killed 7 red-grade spiritual beasts asterisk. That was over way too fast. I should also probably train BEA's restraint. Otherwise, she may end up killing one of my classmates accidentally in the future. Since the mission board has opened, he noticed that he no longer instantly received the GP. Instead, it seems as though if there was a relevant mission available, then the GP will be given once the mission is completed. However, Cain did not mind the delay since he would ultimately receive more GP from the mission. It would only be a problem if it was a mission that took an extremely long time to complete. Then it could be months or years before he saw any GP. After removing the valuable materials from the foxes, he returned to Bridge and they continued on their journey. They continued traveling until it was dark without running into any more spiritual creatures worth hunting. Likely sensing their strength, those at the white grade avoided them. However, Cain wasn't too interested in them anyways. After advancing, the spiritual power they could provide B was practically non-existent. Also, after both he and B advanced, the system no longer granted GP for hunting white-grade creatures, no longer considering them to be a challenge for Cain. They chose to set up camp in a clearing. Despite sleeping in a tent rather than in the open in a tree like usual, Cain actually felt more exposed. Likely because he didn't have B-filled water beneath him acting as a mode of protection. However, one benefit to traveling with others, especially when they have a normal contracted partner, was that shifts can be taken to stand watch. Moreover, since Lady was resting the whole day in Bridge's star space, she could actually stand watch the entire night while both Bridge and Cain rested. They both set up their tents and then started a fire to heat up some canned food. After I take the cooking class, I will just pack spices and then make delicious barbecue every night. Bridge said. I can't wait. Bridge then looked over at Lady and Princess, who were also having their dinner. Doesn't your contract need to eat? After all spiritual beasts need a source of energy. Even an undead contract would still need to be fed. My contract already ate earlier. Bridge looked confused. He was with Cain for almost the entire day. When would he have had a chance to feed his contract? The foxes earlier, Cain clarified. My contract only eats brains. Preferably fresh. Cain was already desensitized to BEA's gruesome diet, but Bridge immediately looked as though he had lost his appetite and put the canned food down in disgust. Cain just shrugged and finished off both of their cans. He hated to waste food after all. Do you think your second contract will be like your first? Well, they must have something in common since they match my affinity. However, I really have no idea what kind of creature I sensed on the train. If it's too weak, I may not even form a contract with it. Although suitable contract acts were rare, the contract was also irreversible. Therefore he couldn't afford to waste a precious spot on something with not much potential. Bridge nodded in understanding. Hopefully, this trip is worth it. But even if it isn't suitable, don't feel pressured to form a contract. I'll help you find another one if you get another lead. On that touching note, they headed to their respective tents to sleep away the rest of the night. Cain wasn't sure if he was tired, but he thought he heard a faint buzzing before drifting off to sleep. The night was as uneventful as the day. They set off again as soon as the sun rose to continue their journey. Gradually they entered an area full of plant spiritual creatures. Species of plants that can condense a consciousness and absorb spiritual power, the green-haired senior's dandelion-looking contract, are pretty rare. In this grove was an entire field full of them. However, Cain could sense that none of them were particularly strong or of high quality, only at the white grade after appearing fully grown. Likely, they were all of only black iron quality. However, while weak, any plant-type spiritual creature is incredibly valuable, often a key material needed by pharmacists, planners and cooks. This field was practically a gold mine. I'm surprised that this field hasn't been picked clean yet. Cain dismounted and walked into the clearing to pick a flower. Bam! Cain was pulled back by a tremendous force before a giant stinger slammed through the air where his head just and into the ground. Holy shit! Cain hadn't had such a close brush with death since the White Widow mother chased him in anger. He looked to the source of the stinger and saw a giant wasp half his size, already beginning to sprout a new sharp tip. Grr! Bridge immediately released Lady, and she took an aggressive stance at the threat. It was a Vesperi, a silver-quality insect with wind attributes. They typically exist in large colonies protecting a queen. They are known for their fast-flying speed and the ability to launch sharp stingers from their tails at targets. They are also one of the few wasp species capable of producing honey. They are very rare, but if one could find the queen, they would be a very in-demand bond due to the ability to control multiple creatures with one contract. Additionally, they could provide their contractor with a valuable resource since they are able to extract the unique properties of flowers they collect nectar from to produce honey with varying effects. However, they are not a popular contract for those with a higher level of talent for two reasons. The majority of the wasps the queen produces are males that are responsible for tending to the queen and collecting nectar to produce honey but have no actual combat power. Usually, only one female guard wasp and 5 male worker wasps are produced at each grade. Meaning that a red grade wasp queen should have only 2 females guarding her, and 10 males. Therefore, the numerical advantage is not that significant. While their individual combat power is on the higher end at their strength level, they have several weaknesses such as to poison, ice, and fire. Therefore, a powerful enough contract with restraining attributes would be able to eliminate 2 guards at the same level alone. The second drawback is that there is only one recorded instance of a Vesperi evolving, and it was centuries ago. Therefore, it's generally regarded as not having an evolutionary form since the evolutionary conditions are completely unknown. Therefore, usually, only those with not much talent or hope for exceeding orange-grade spiritual power in their lives would consider contracting them in the hopes of still living a rich life off of the honey they produce. Cain began to input his spiritual power into the spear to cause a fog that obscured its vision. Now all he had to do was wait. He should be able to take care of the rest. Celestivulates. However, after a full minute, when BEA's prey would usually already be dead, the Vesperi was only slightly sluggish. What's going on? Cain could sense that it was still in the red grade, so a higher level that B should not be the issue. The only feedback Cain received from B was that something appeared to be fighting her. This had never happened before. Usually, once B successfully enters the body, the infected are completely helpless. This was the first time B was being restrained by a creature at the same level. Change of plans, Bridge. My contract is having trouble dealing with it. I'll use the mist to obscure its vision so that Lady can deal a finishing blow. Bridge nodded. After all, with the mist's assistance there was not much risk to Lady, and they needed to deal with this wasp. Lady slowly approached, while Cain concentrated the mist around the wasp and directed B to expend all of her remaining spiritual power on impeding its senses. Snap. Move back quickly. Bridge yelled. At the last moment, the wasp dodged Lady's attack, causing her to snap at the air, before turning around to stab at her. Cain quickly concentrated the mist in front of Lady so even if the stinger was launched it'd hopefully miss. B.I. said to focus on impeding its movements. Cain screamed in frustration. However, it seemed as though with each passing moment B was losing energy while the wasp was recovering. Desperate, Cain crudely channeled all of his spiritual power into B hoping to boost her abilities. Bridge. Send Lady again now. Cain yelled at Bridge, not confident that Lady would listen to a command from him. Crack. For a moment the remaining sum of both Cain and BEA's spiritual power was able to restrain its movements, allowing Lady to land a crushing blow to its head with her claws. Cain didn't receive a notification for the kill and the number of hunted red-grade spiritual creatures for his mission also did not increase. Therefore, Cain realized that he or his spiritual creature must be the one to deal the final blow to earn GP. The moment that it died, be said that whatever was fighting her split also slowly lost its strength and disappeared. Cain slowly walked to its corpse, remaining on the lookout for any other sudden attacks, while Bridge and Lady also stood guard from a distance. Cain grabbed the corpse and quickly left the clearing with Bridge to their mounts a short distance away. He had completely exhausted his spiritual power and didn't want to risk another attack. When they rode a safe distance away, he stopped to examine the body. Even before Bee advanced, she had no trouble restraining red-grade spiritual creatures. Now they rarely survive more than 20 to 30 seconds. He needed to figure out why this Vesperi was so resistant to Bee. He thoroughly examined its body and even directed Bee into its brain. Now that it was dead, she had no issue exploring. However, she didn't note anything different from usual. Whatever was resisting her had already faded. Maybe she could have found it while it was still alive, but once it was dead the trail went cold. Cain was reluctant to leave a field of spiritual plants alone. Especially, since he was going to enter college not only as a beast tamer but also as a planner, they may have unexpected uses. However, while he was unable to figure out an effective method to dealing with the Vesperi, he didn't want to put himself and Bridge in danger. There was one more reason why he wanted to risk going into the field again, and it wasn't only due to his greed. Looking at Bridge, it was also obvious that he had the same thoughts as Cain. My grades aren't as good as yours, so I can't be sure, but towards the middle of the field, did you see? Yup. Cain confirmed. Legacies are more likely to awaken an affinity not only due to their genetics but also due to their status and connections that allow access to the extremely rare few existing materials capable of boosting their children's chance of awakening. Although even the most effective of these spiritual plants may only result in a 10% greater likelihood of awakening an affinity, it was still that slight likelihood that people pay millions of celestial dollars for. As orphans who were always skeptical of their chances of awakening, they, and likely the others in the orphanage, had long memorized the few things capable of increasing the chances of awakening. Celestivulates are the lowest quality and most common of plants with such an effect, although still rare. However, it's because they used to be more common that they were given the honor of being named after the Empire. Much of the progress in the early years of the Empire was based on this low-grade flower and its ability to slightly increase the chances of awakening. Although excessive removal of it has caused it now become extremely rare. If an individual has an affinity, it increases their sensitivity during the affinity ceremony to the pull, causing a modest increase in their chances of sensing their affinity egg, even if the pull is nearly undetectable. It has also been reported in rare cases to cause a slightly higher chance of awakening an affinity related to plants, which are usually at least C-rated. It is a decent affinity to have, especially when the majority of those who do awaken will only have a grade of D or lower. The patch at the center of the clearing had 6 of these precious and rare flowers. Both Bridge and Cain wanted to obtain them for their younger siblings to use. Although not enough for all 9 children of the orphanage, the youngest 3 had at least another 10 years before the ceremony. By that time Cain and Bridge should have the connections to buy more. Especially since they are attending a top 5 college. Their shared sense of responsibility as older siblings would not allow them to give up such a golden opportunity. The chances of any other members of the orphanage having an affinity are very low, and they only have each other to rely on and look out for their best interests. If he could increase the number of beast tamers coming out of the orphanage, then the entire orphanage, both current and future members, would benefit. Crisis. After confirming the identity of the flower at the center of the field, Bridge was also on board to go back to the field. However, they could not enter the field carelessly. They needed to come up with a plan. The fact that the field is still intact and those flowers are still there led Cain to correctly guess that all other adventurers had probably died and become compost for the flower garden. The fact that multiple beast tamers died in that area may play a role in why exactly there were so many spiritual plants growing there. While those strong enough to easily kill the Vesperi were also probably not interested in a bunch of black iron quality spiritual plants. Even the Celestivulates, since they'd probably have the means to purchase better ones. Most likely more Vesperi were guarding the field, and using those flowers to produce honey. To effectively come up with a plan of action, they first needed to figure out how many enemies they were dealing with. They had already killed 1 female guard wasp, and considering that the guards are usually the same level in strength as the queen, a red-grade queen should only have 1 more guarding her. If they were to try and enter the field, it may not even try to attack them in fear of leaving the queen without protection. Therefore, they decided to enter the field again once they had restored their spiritual power to see if the last guard would be lured out once they had restored their spiritual power. However, unlike Bridge, Lady and himself who could passively restore their spiritual power, Bee would need some help to absorb spiritual power. Thankfully, the process of refilling spiritual power is not as aggressive as condensing additional spiritual power. Therefore, Cain allowed Bee to infect him while ordering her to not get greedy. Just passively absorb the spiritual power in my body without doing any damage. Then Cain went into the planetarium to speed up the rate of his recovery. Unfortunately, by the time everyone had their spiritual power recovered, it was already getting dark. They didn't feel confident about being able to fight it with limited vision. Therefore, they all decided to go to sleep after a quick meal. However, due to the intense battle during the day, this time Princess stood guard while Lady rested in the star space. The next day, after everyone woke up and ate, they left the night Maras tied up at their campsite while they crept towards the field of flowers again. They didn't see anything in the field. However, yesterday they also didn't see the Vesperi before it attacked. Clearly with its wind attribute it could fly towards them from a point beyond their vision extremely quickly. Instead, they planned to obscure the vision of anything that may be looking at the field. Cain produced a thick cloud over the clearing before he, Bridge and Lady slowly crept toward the location of the celestivulates. Phew! They all breathed a sigh of relief at reaching the flowers without any sign of an attacker. Slowly, Cain knelt down to begin digging out the flowers from the root while Bridge removed a preservation box from the storage space. This was a must-have item for anyone going into the wilderness. After all, even if you weren't looking for a spiritual plant, anyone would kick themselves if they were unprepared in the event that they did run into a rare spiritual plant. The preservation container would ensure that the flowers remained fresh and didn't lose any of their beneficial properties with time. After all, most space rings did not have a preservation ability. Those that did would be an astronomical price. The flowers could stay in there for over a decade and look as though they were just picked. That way they didn't need to worry about keeping them fresh for their siblings when the next one's affinity ceremony won't be for at least 3 more years. After digging up all 6 flowers, Cain glanced at the rest of the flowers tempted to dig up more. However, he ultimately decided to not push his luck and to quickly leave before their presence was noticed. Taking care to be as quiet as possible, they slowly crept out of the field. Right when they were about to exit. Bzzzzz. Whimper. Lady. Suddenly, a stinger came through the mist and stabbed into Lady's hind leg. Cain immediately covered Bridge's mouth before dragging him from his initial position. Just in time too, because another stinger came flying from a different direction than the other stinger flew from. There's more than one. How is that possible? Are there 2 queens? Cain quickly chose to exhaust half of his remaining spiritual power to make the mist around them more dense. They were just about to leave the field and in a moment of laxness at feeling as though they had gotten away with their heist, he had let his control of the mist slip for a moment. That short moment of laxness was probably when they spotted Lady who was in the lead. It was his fault. He leaned next to Bridge's ear while keeping a tight hold of his mouth to avoid him making any more screams. They are locating us by sound. He whispered. Stay silent and recall Lady before another round of stingers is fired. I think there may be more than one. Bridge nodded with tears in his eyes. When he sensed that he had calmed down, he let go of his mouth. He also heard no more noises from Lady, so he assumed Bridge had followed his instructions. When the wasps had entered the mist, BEA's splits had infected them. Unfortunately, similar to yesterday, she wasn't able to exert much of an effect. However, that's not why he had still sent B. He planned to use the information relayed by the splits to keep track of their position in the mist and avoid another sneak attack. However, it was easier said than done. B was relaying constant changes in their position as they searched the field. They were extremely fast, and it wouldn't be long until they located Cain and the others. The source of the draw. Cain's mind worked in overdrive trying to figure out a solution. Lady was too injured to attempt a similar strategy as yesterday. He also didn't have enough spiritual power to channel to be installed 2, or maybe even more, attackers. Especially since he used the majority of it to increase the size and density of the mist. First things first, we need to slow them down. Cain once again whispered in Bridge's ear his plan. We may need Princess. Does she have any skill that could instantly decrease the temperature in an area remotely? Bridge nodded and called out his second contract. Thank God. We may be able to get out of this without any more injuries. I am going to point in the direction it currently is and whisper to you distance. Would you be able to convey the distance to Princess accurately? After all, she was just a baby. Thankfully, he nodded again. Bridge had not been slacking with the education of his newest contract. He asked B to let him know when one paused for long enough to attack. Stay ready, he whispered. A few seconds later he pointed diagonally 30 degrees to the left. 12 feet away. Scree thump. Kane quickly ran to the source of the scream with his spear in hand. Just as he had planned. The water droplets in the mist around stuck to the wings and caused them to freeze over when the temperature suddenly dropped. The wasp was now unable to fly and struggling on its back. Bang. Ugh. But it's still clearly not defenseless, Kane thought after deflecting a heavy blow from the stinger it waved at him. Moving swiftly, he delivered a deep blow into its abdomen, hoping that it'd be fatal, before running away. He couldn't risk delaying for more wasps to arrive or for its wings to thaw. Kane crept quietly back to where Bridge was waiting and held a thumb up to show that the plan had succeeded. Kane wanted to try the plan again, but he sensed through B that there was suddenly another guard wasp that had entered the mist, while his spiritual power was continuously being drained to maintain the mist. We need to move. Keep Princess ready to do the same things again if we need to while we leave while I maintain our coverage. They slowly crept towards the tall line of trees while Kane used B to monitor the location of the wasps. Thankfully they seemed distracted by their fallen comrade and they were able to leave safely. Once under full coverage, they burst into a full sprint for several minutes until they returned to where their mounts were tied to a tree branch. How's Lady? She's okay, it was just a graze. We were both just shocked by the sudden attack. Bridge calmed down when Lady informed him that the injury wasn't serious. I don't understand what's going on. For a red grade queen, there should be at most 2 guards. The rest should be harmless workers. However, there were at least 3 in the mist just now, plus the one they defeated previously, totaling 4 guards, exactly double what there should be. Also, strangely despite all of the time they've spent around those flowers, they haven't seen a single worker bee. Just what is up with this queen? Well, it's not our concern anymore, we got what we came for so we can just continue looking for your second contract once Lady heals up. True. Although Kane was incredibly curious about this situation that seemed to contradict everything he had learned about the species in textbooks. They decided to move further away from the field of flowers before stopping to rest for the night. However, Kane wasn't sure if it was some kind of post-traumatic stress response, but he kept feeling like he could hear the buzzing of wasp wings before he went to sleep. The next morning, Kane decided to finally activate the 24-hour radar he had previously exchanged for. Instantly in the bottom corner of his vision a circular display appeared with a black background, and 3 concentric rings like a bullseye target, each ring Kane assumed was indicating the distance of 1 mile. At the very center of the bullseye was a blinking white dot, Kane's location. Every few seconds sweeping lines would pulse outwards to scan the area. Figures there was a catch. It can only detect up to 3 miles. That's practically nothing in this huge forest. As Kane expected, the range was too short for his potential contract to show up on the map. He and Bridge on horseback rounded the field of flowers and began to move in a zigzag maneuver to cover more area. I'm certain that we are almost at the distance the train was at when I felt the pull. Kane thought correctly, although he could not see any changes to the map, he began to feel the faint pull again. He turned to Bridge in excitement to let him know and they set off in that direction, stopping every second to make fine adjustments in the direction they were headed. Eventually, the pull led them to another clearing full of flowers. This field was much larger than the previous one. The quality of the spiritual plants was also of a higher grade. While most were still of black iron quality, Kane could sense red grade spiritual power from at least 3 fully grown plants, meaning that they were of bronze quality. Unfortunately, he couldn't get a closer look at them from beyond the field to identify them. Also, learning from his previous mistakes, he didn't dare to carelessly enter the field, afraid that there would be another ambush. Bzzzzzzz. His hunch was correct. The next moment, 4 Vesperi guards flew from the center of the field towards the field of flowers and extended a long, slender straw-like structure into the flowers to suck up nectar. What the hell is going on? Why are there so many guards? And where are the male worker Vesperi? Isn't this their job? And beyond the group of Vesperi, in the center of the field beyond his vision, was the source of the pull from his contract. Beep, at this moment a new red dot appeared at the edge of the radar. The source of the draw, too. Kane and Bridge slowly backed away to discuss a plan. The pull is coming from within that field. You're sure? Maybe it's just on the other side of the field and we have to circle around? Bridge asked nervously. I wish. I would have hoped for that too if the radar hadn't also clarified the position. I'm certain that it's coming from the center of the field. Sigh. Both of them couldn't help but release a sigh of distress. Could you maybe try a similar strategy to last time? Cover the whole field in mist. My mist can't cover the whole field at a density thick enough to fully cover our figures, but I don't think we have a choice. I can maybe make it dense enough to cover all of us, and Princess can drop the temperature in the areas I direct to freeze their wings like last time. We'll have to be fast though. I don't think all of our spiritual powers could sustain this plan for long. Is Lady fully healed? Bridge hesitated. She's not fully healed, but she feels good enough to battle again. Thankfully, spiritual power allows for an increased speed of healing. Otherwise, it'd probably take a week before she was battle-ready again. Okay, we've got our plan. I will focus on using the coverage from the fog to cover our figures while Princess incapacitates them and Lady goes in for the kill. What is their night vision like? Wasps usually go to sleep at night and don't have the best night vision. Therefore, they'd have an additional advantage if they could implement their plan during the nighttime. The dual coverage of the night and mist should be sufficient to fully cover them. However, Kane and Bridge's own visions will also be impeded, and if there was just one enemy, he wouldn't want to take this risk. But up against at least 4 they really need every advantage. The north, where Princess is originally from, often stays dark for several months on end, so her vision at night isn't much different from during the day. Lady's night vision also isn't bad. Kane breathed a sigh of relief. Okay. We move at night. They hunkered behind the bushes at the periphery of the clearing to keep track of the wasps' movements and to hopefully get a better idea of their numbers. Occasionally, 1 or 2 would head off into the distance, likely to the other flower patch. However, at least 4 always remained guarding and collecting nectar in this field. Kane still had no idea how the queen was able to go against common sense to produce so many guard wasps. With the 2 killed before, plus the 6 he counted today, that's at least 8. They ate dinner to ensure their bodies were at optimal condition. However, they didn't set a fire to heat up the cans, to avoid risking detection by the wasps, instead suffering through eating the cold and congealed soup. When night finally fell, they heard a brief period of buzzing periodically, as all of the wasps that had left the area during the day to other flower patches rushed home. Kane finally realized why he'd heard buzzing right before bedtime the last couple of nights. When it was finally all quiet, they chose to wait another hour to be extra sure before slowly leaving the coverage of the bushes and creeping towards clearing. At the same time, Kane also caused a thick mist to surround them. They slowly began to creep towards the center of the clearing. Oomph! Something grabbed Kane's ankle and tripped him to the ground. He turned to see a root extending from one of the few red-grade spiritual plants in the clearing. Clearly, the plants developed some offensive capabilities by this level, unlike the white-grade plants around them. Red-grade plants also would no longer die once uprooted and could have limited mobility. Kane used the spear to cut himself free and quickly distanced himself from the plant. Thankfully, the sleeping wasps didn't appear to have woken up due to the small commotion. They continued with their journey, this time taking care to avoid the areas where he sensed red-grade plants during the day. They were only around a mile out from the center of the clearing, and the radar showed that they were almost upon the prospective contract. Kane was filled with anticipation, hoping that it'd be a big enough boost to his offensive abilities to allow him to keep his top ranking once school started. However, even a mile out they were able to faintly see the giant figure in the distance. As they got closer, its identity became clear: the wasp's nest. Under the dim moonlight, the massive nest loomed over them, casting an eerie shadow across what should have been a dreamy scene of a beautiful garden at night. The nest, roughly the size of a 2-story house, resembled a monstrous, warped honeycomb, with layers of grayish, paper material clinging together in a chaotic, irregular pattern. Its surface was rough and uneven, with gaping holes the size of an adult human and bulging, irregular ridges. Kane wasn't sure if it was a trick on his mind from the horrific appearance and creepy atmosphere, but the whole nest seemed to be pulsing rhythmically like the steady beating of a heart. However, Kane knew that the true threat was hidden from view inside. He looked back and forth between the radar and the nest. Please, please tell me that I don't need to go in there." However, as they got closer to the nest, and its location coincided with the red dot on the radar, Cain got his answer. "We'll stick to the plan," he whispered. "The only change is that we need to go in there and that I will be the one to deal the final blow if they are asleep." Cain figured that the spear would be more quiet than Lady crushing their exoskeleton. Bridge looked horrified at the prospect of him going in there but didn't fight him on it. "Hopefully, they stay asleep, and then Princess can just simply freeze any resting guards we see on the way." They cautiously approached the nest before climbing through one of the lowest holes. The source of the draw, 3. Inside the wasp's nest was no less creepy. Winding passages twisted and turned in a disorienting maze. The narrow corridors were dim and oppressive, increasing Cain's feelings of claustrophobia. The eerie silence was occasionally broken by the faint, rhythmic rustling of sleeping wasps. Close to the entrance they just came through was a chamber containing 2 guard wasps squirming in their sleep. Following the plan, Princess froze their wings to prevent them from suddenly moving after waking. Then Cain stabbed his spear into their heads. *Ding. Host has killed 2 red-grade spiritual beasts. Now he was only 1 red-grade kill away from completing the mission. They exited the chamber as quietly as they had entered, killing another one along the way. *Ding. Host has killed 1 red-grade spiritual beast. Rewarding 60 GP. Mission to hunt 10 red-grade spiritual creatures is reissued. Thankfully, the hunting mission was just refreshed once completed so he could continue to benefit from the higher GP of the missions. Everything so far had been going according to plan. He wasn't sure how many guards there were in total, but they have killed 5 in total between yesterday and today. It takes time for the queen to hatch more, so Cain didn't think there could be too many more. Following the lead of the pull from his affinity and the radar, they entered a vast chamber at the center of the nest. The floor was slightly sticky with patches of dark, glistening honey. Amid the honey, a single wasp egg was nestled in a corner. Through the egg's translucent surface they could see a wriggling larva inside, twisting and squirming as it developed. In the center of the chamber was a surprisingly refined throne emanating a regal aura. It was elevated high above on a platform composed of steps of carefully arranged honeycombs. It had elegant and delicate curves and was decorated with the most beautiful of the flowers collected by the wasps, many of which were red-grade spiritual plants. The only reason those 3 red-grade spiritual plants outside probably avoided being brought back to decorate the chair was because they had more aggressive tendencies and the overprotective guards didn't want to risk them attacking the queen. Princess moaned in pleasure after licking the honey on the floor, completely breaking up the solemn atmosphere. Cain was sure that his contract was on that throne. However, the wasp queen shouldn't meet the criteria for his affinity. Confused, he climbed the steps to the platform and looked at the figure perched on the throne. In striking contrast to the guard wasps and eerie atmosphere, the queen had a harmless appearance. Despite the commanding aura emanating from her, she was surprisingly small and delicate. Resembling a bumblebee more than a wasp, she had a chubby mostly yellow body, with tiny wings that glowed faintly in the darkness. The mismatched size of her wings to her body gave a surprisingly cute and harmless look. As Cain examined her, her large eyes also looked curiously up at him. Thankfully, she didn't feel threatened and immediately called for her guards. He cut his hand to initiate the contract and slowly held it out towards her. He didn't dare try and forcefully cut her. She examined his hand before a tiny straw-like protrusion extended into the wound. Ugh! It didn't hurt. But it was definitely uncomfortable feeling something sipping the blood from his body. He waited a moment without feeling the beginnings of a contract being established. He was about to try something else when the abdomen of the wasp queen began to emit a faint red glow. Had it not been dark, the glow would have been faint enough to miss in the daytime. The glow steadily moved from the abdomen to the head, and then to the wound in his hand. He didn't even need to direct the entering spiritual power as it rushed toward his second star. The moment the contract was established, the queen looked as though something had been lost and began to die at a visible rate. Scree! Cain could also hear the sound of the wasp guards waking in alarm as they sensed their queen's imminent death. However, the first wasps to enter the chamber no longer appeared threatening. Their legs were shaking as though they too would drop dead at any moment. Not understanding the cause, Cain quickly sensed the location of his second contract and released it from his body, back into the queen. Through the Queen, he could sense a fainter connection being established with the wasp colony. A connection that likely already existed but was unintentionally broken by Kane's contract. Figuring that Kane was the cause of their Queen's sudden weakness, they moved to attack the intruders. However, just as several stingers were about to be ejected in his direction, the Queen sent out a barely audible sound. All attacks halted. Kane's group and the wasps appeared to be at a standoff, staring each other down. However, with each passing moment, he could feel the connection between the Queen and himself strengthening. Now he could even faintly detect the presence of the wasps in the nest. It felt like a gentle tugging at the edges of Kane's consciousness. His connection with the Queen was much stronger. It was at a level second only to be in his new contract. This sensation of secondary, and even tertiary contract was a completely new sensation to Kane, and he was beginning to feel overwhelmed by all of the faint thoughts and emotions coming to his mind by all of the wasps. He chose to recall his new contract to his second star. This time the Queen and her remaining 7 guards, plus the egg, were also drawn into the space. Gradually, he could see the star space gradually taking on the appearance of a wasp's nest. However, this time much less crudely designed and less grotesque in appearance. Kane and Bridge look around at the now empty hive. Jackpot, they both thought. Harvest. How many preservation containers are there in your storage space? Only 10, one of which already contains the celestivulates. Neither of them could have imagined that they'd run into so many spiritual plants. The number of containers was not nearly enough to collect every single plant in the field. They needed to be selective with what they chose to bring back. Thankfully, the majority of the plants with the most beneficial effects, such as calming the mind, increasing the ease of absorbance for spiritual power and more, had already been sorted by the guards and inserted into the Queen's throne. Stripping the throne of the black iron-grade spiritual plants, they were put into a preservation box. The red-grade plants were an issue though. After all, they were technically still spiritual creatures, and wouldn't die when uprooted like the white-grade ones. Therefore, they could not be put into the storage space which could only contain dead things. Instead they removed several large satchels from the space and began to carefully place them in. Thankfully, they had the Night Maras to help them bring them back to the city. After cleaning out the throne, they had filled 3 preservation boxes and 4 satchels with spiritual plants. They then looked at Princess and Lady having a field day licking the walls. The honey here was also incredibly valuable. Kane released the Queen and asked her to direct him to where the majority of the honey was stored. They followed behind her chubby body as it clumsily flew forward supported by tiny wings. Quickly they reached a chamber composed of honeycomb and had a glistening thick liquid spilling down its walls. The honey appeared to be separated into distinct categories, likely dependent on the effects of the flowers they used to make it. Kane then released the rest of the guards, now a lot more docile around him, and ordered them to begin collecting the honeycombs so that they could be taken into Bridge's space ring. Hopefully, his ring could hold it all. However, the Queen then mentioned that all of this honey could instead be brought to the new hive in his star space. Taking this as a much better option, Kane gave them permission to do so. While they went about deconstructing the honeycomb walls of their old home, he and Bridge went outside. They had 6 preservation boxes left, but the enormous field would likely require at least 20. Therefore, he and Bridge could only select the most valuable ones. They located more celestivulates which were put in the same container as the others. Now there were 19 in total, more than enough for all of their siblings. Each of them could even afford to take more than one. They then began to rank the flowers in order of importance. They disregarded all of the poisonous ones. Any white-grade poison would be useless at their level anyways. Instead, they focused on those that could increase the rate of spiritual power condensation, improve mental strength, heal, and slightly improve their physical constitution. There were also some plants that slightly improved the sensitivity of spiritual creatures to an element, if they already possessed that element, to improve the ease with which they can learn new skills and improve the proficiency over their existing skills of that attribute. There were 5 of such plants, 3 for the fire attribute, and 2 for wind. The 2 for wind will be split between Bridge and Kane since they both now have contracts with a wind attribute. Although Kane's contract is a secondary one. They also stuffed the 3 red-grade spiritual plants into separate satchels each to avoid them hurting one another. They were not threatening once you were aware of their presence and trimmed the roots, vines, and thorns that they used to launch attacks. Satisfied with their collection, They filled up all of their remaining preservation containers and left behind a field with only poisonous, illumination, or other less useful effects. They returned back to the hive to find high stacks of honeycomb ready to be transplanted to the new hive. The guards each gripping a stack of honeycombs, and Cain recalled them. Likely because it was something they had produced, there was no resistance from the space. Cain turned to the queen. The honeycomb that she held had a different appearance. It had more of a jelly consistency and was a deep auburn color. She expressed through their secondary contract that it was royal jelly, a necessary component if she ever hoped to evolve. Although she mentioned that she is unaware of the other conditions for their species evolution. Cain nodded. He already knew that it'd be difficult to evolve the queen, but at least he now knew one of the key components. Hopefully, he'd come up with more ideas while at college. After collecting everything of value, they headed back to their waiting nightmares and loaded them with satchels filled with the red-grade spiritual plants. It had been a very eventful night, so Cain and Bridge decided to set up camp and sleep the rest of the night away. Cain had thankfully been able to complete his second contract without anyone getting hurt, but it had still been a nerve-wracking process, every moment leaving him on edge. However, there was one thing that Cain needed to do before going to sleep. He needed to use the system to figure out the true identity of his second contract. The queen was obviously not who he was directly contracted to, merely serving as a host for his contract. Yet, her life and the lives of all of the other wasps seemed to strangely be in his contract's hands. When his contract was removed, their appearance of quickly moving towards death was very apparent. Not to mention his contract was likely responsible for BEA's lack of effectiveness on the wasps and may even be responsible for why this queen unusually only produces female guards. The new partners. Cain moved to the system page for his contract's information and looked at the new information panel. Nickname, not applicable. Species, Metronia. Metronia is a bacteria inherited from mother to daughter in insect species. It usually inhabits the reproductive organs of its host and uses a variety of methods to ensure that the future generation is all female. Such methods include, but are not limited to, killing all male embryos before they can hatch, male eggs from infected mothers developing as females or infertile pseudo-females, enabling females of a species to reproduce by parthenogenesis, and more. In return, it grants its host increased resistance against diseases and poisons, while also increasing the growth speed of its host. Quality, silver. Spiritual power grade, red, 500/1000 SP. Type, microorganism, bacteria. Attribute, life. Skills. Eve's law, it can exert supreme authority over its host's future descendants. From whether or not they'd be permitted to be born, to their gender. This control also extends beyond the womb to control the life or death of all progeny. A perfect symbiosis, the infected host and all future descendants will be conferred with increased resistance to poisons and disease, while also benefiting from a faster growth speed. Cain was pleasantly surprised. While it didn't have as many skills as B, the skills it did have were of supreme quality. Looking at the information panel, he could finally understand the cause of the previous things that puzzled him. The reason why there were no male wasps was likely because his contract had turned all of them into females or pseudo-females. There were 7 wasps remaining, and Cain had killed 5, which perfectly adds up to the 12 wasps you'd expect in a red-grade Vesperi nest. Except instead of 10 males and 2 female guards, they were now 12 guards. The wasp's resistance to B could also be explained. The life attribute energy from Metronia was continuously fighting against B. Similar to B, Metronia also seems to need a host to absorb energy. However, thankfully Cain doesn't have to worry about this, and similar to a normal contract, the queen bee is able to absorb spiritual power in Cain's space that has already been perfectly tailored to her, and that spiritual power will in turn be fed back to Metronia. In addition to the boost in absorption the star space will provide, Metronia's A-level skill will also increase the rate of absorption. Therefore, Metronia and the queen will likely be Cain's first contract to enter orange grade. They may even advance before college starts in 2.5 weeks. Before turning to the additional information panels the system provides for the Vesperi queen and her daughters, he decided to first give his new contract a name. After thinking for a while, he decided to take her name from her main skill, Eve. Nickname, not applicable. Species, Vesperi queen, host secondary contract. The Vesperi queen reigns supreme over its hive and her comfort and safety is to the utmost importance of her children. The honey produced by their species can take on the effects of the flower whose nectar was used to produce it. Due to being the host for Matronia, all of her offspring are female. Quality: silver. Spiritual power grade: red, 500/1000 SP. Type: insect type, wasp. Attribute: wind. Skills: A royal command, she can boost the stats of her offspring by 30% for a limited time. Duration depends on the number of children being affected and skill proficiency. A noble breeze, she can summon a gentle gust of air to induce a calming effect to reduce the aggression and vigilance of enemies. On allies, it can heal minor mental ailments and restore mental strength. The great luck continued. Although she doesn't have much combat ability herself, the queen acts as an excellent support to her daughters in battle. Additionally, her second skill to restore mental strength was of extra importance to Cain as it would speed up his recovery after feeding B. Although he'd need to test the skill at a later date to see its effectiveness. Cain was also relieved to see that the amount of spiritual power the queen possesses seems to be identical to Eve, meaning that he didn't have to worry about one lagging behind the other if their growth occurs simultaneously. Similar to Eve, Cain felt like it wasn't appropriate to keep calling her Wasp Queen. She needed a name. Not wanting to be too complicated, he eventually settled on Queen, and for her children he will just name them 1 through 12. Cain nodded, satisfied with his excellent naming choices, and continued to look at the information panel for the Wasp Guards. Family name. The trip back to the city progressed a lot faster. Cain sent 3 Wasp Guards ahead to scout for any danger in front of them while they rode the Night Mares at a sprint back to the city. With reliable scouts ahead, the whole trip back was not only leisurely but fruitful, with Cain receiving 6 kill notifications without him having to lift a finger. Now he was 4 kills short of receiving 60 GP. They returned to the city the next morning after only one night of rest and immediately went about disposing of the materials and plants collected that were of no use to them. Even after splitting the profits, Cain should have enough to buy a smaller space ring of his own. The bulk of the money came from the red-grade spiritual plants. Whether someone decides to contract them or use them as an ingredient, they were extremely valuable. However, out of the red-grade plants, there was one that Cain and Bridge decided not to sell. An Oros. The large red flower had been the key decorative feature in Queen's Throne originally. The guards likely collected it due to its ability to increase the amount of spiritual power in the vicinity by a marginal amount, providing a slight boost to the speed of condensing spiritual power. The slight increase would be negligible to Cain due to the planetarium. They had also learned at the college information session that the dorms and several key locations on the campus were equipped with sigils to help increase the students' condensation of spiritual power. Therefore, Bridge didn't really need it either. They planned to plant it at the orphanage, hoping to further improve the ease with which the others could cultivate. Ah! The things we do for them. We're such good big brothers, Bridge said smugly. But Cain couldn't help but agree, full of pride that since awakening an affinity they could be of greater help. They also decided to keep some of the plants that can improve mental strength and constitution. Their effectiveness decreased with repeated usage, so they brought back just enough to be gifts to everyone in their family. Cain also prepared a little extra to gift to Mr. Evergreen to thank him for being a great teacher during the time he'd known him, and also to gift their neighbors John and Sally. They then went to pay and collect the bracelets they had previously ordered before heading to the train station. They were finally heading home. On the way, he fed B and then asked Queen to use her skill to restore his mental strength. The duration of the 24-hour 30% decrease in mental strength penalty was already reduced to 12 hours when he used his mental attribute armor. With the help of Queen, the penalty was further reduced to a 20% reduction in mental strength for 10 hours. Cain also decided to be a little extravagant with his suddenly rich resources. He made a tea with the petals of a spiritual plant that is said to increase mental strength. He also sweetened the cup with some of the spiritual honey in his star space. After finishing the cup, he looked at the system. There wasn't a further reduction in the penalty. He wasn't sure if it was because the max reduction was already achieved or if the white-grade plant whose petals he used was too weak to have an effect on him. Still, the tea was delicious. If he's struck by a sudden urge to act pretentious in the future, he could consider greeting his guests with quality spiritual tea and honey. Immersed in his fantasies of the life of a nouveau rich, he took a quick nap to wait the remainder of the penalty. By the time they had arrived back to Bright Star City, the penalty was already more than half done. Not wanting to delay the time with their family anymore, they headed back to the orphanage. The moment they entered the door, oomph oomph, Kane and Bridge fell down dramatically at the tackles of the youngest children aged 6 to 8. Ah. Charlie, Melody, Parker, Sonny. You guys have gotten so much stronger since the short time we've been gone. They got up from the giggling pile of bodies and made their way further into the room. It was now close to dinner time, so they could hear bustling noises in the kitchen. In there was Sally, so it seemed that the neighbors would be joining them. Perfect. Kane and Bridge can share their examination results along with the gifts they brought back with everyone at once. After everyone was seated around the long table for dinner, Kane and Bridge cut to the chase without teasing them this time. You are looking at the 2 newest editions of Dark Moon College, Kane said to a room full of cheers. We knew you'd both make it, the director said. Actually, we all thought that you'd failed and you were taking so long to come back in order to try another entrance exam or compose yourself and not burst into tears the minute you walked through the door, Cherry said before everyone gave awkward and embarrassed chuckles. Kane's eyebrow twitched in annoyance. Leave it to Cherry to ruin the atmosphere. We were delayed because we were finding my second contract and also getting gifts for you all. Although now I'm not sure if we want to give them out. Immediately, the children burst into loud appeals to not withhold their gifts and that they only had doubts due to Cherry's big mouth. Okay. Okay. Ahem, we will now begin handing out the gifts. They had already paid someone in the Starfire City to package and wrap up what they wanted to gift nicely. For the director, John and Sally. Here. We brought back spiritual tea leaves. The effects of the different leaves are labeled on the container. They all looked shocked at a gift more extravagant than expected and tried to hand it back. Tea with effects such as these would cost close to 6 figures, and they were each given at least 3 containers full of them. However, Kane and Bridge to take them back, so they eventually all reluctantly accepted. For the rest of you brats. Kane turned around and pulled out small beautifully wrapped boxes containing each one's personalized bracelet. We picked out the ones we thought would suit you best, and in the middle is a nameplate you can engrave with your name like Bridge and I did. He held up his wrist to show his own engraved. The kids, even the older ones, looked satisfied with the gift and immediately tried to put them on with sparkling eyes. Why do your bracelets say Kane and Bridge Newman? Cherry asked. At those words, the rest also looked over to confirm and then looked at Kane and Bridge in confusion. Well. Bridge began awkwardly. When we were registering for college, I was upset that we were the only ones without a last name. Kane suggested that we add one, and we eventually settled on Newman, after New Beginnings Orphanage. The director looked like he was about to burst into moved tears, while the rest also looked at the bracelets in contemplation. Me too. Charlie mumbled. I want to share the same last name like a real family too. The rest also slowly nodded and looked at the director. Can we add last names too? Finally, the tears boiled over as he hugged the youngest ones while nodding. The room suddenly devolved into an extra emotional atmosphere. The only exception was Milo, who was still staring down at the bracelet in contemplation. Unlike the rest of them who were orphaned young enough to not have much if any memories of their birth parents, Milo still remembered his birth parents. They named him and he still carries their last name, Milo Whitaker. He may not want to alter his last name. Hope. After everyone dispersed after the meal, Kane and Bridge called the director and Milo aside to speak privately. The director then led them to his office. They had one last item to give the director. However, the fewer people that know about this item the better. Not that he doesn't trust the others and their neighbors. However, they were very young, and John and Sally were also pretty simple. Therefore, any of them may accidentally let something slip. An item that can increase the chances of awakening would definitely cause a lot of unkind eyes to focus on their little orphanage. After everyone was seated, Kane pulled out the preservation box containing the celestivulates. In this container are 19 celestivulates. I want you to hold onto them until everyone is ready to use them. There should be enough for everyone to use too. Although the second one won't cause much of an effect after the first one, it's still something. The director accepted the container gratefully, but Milo looked as though he was going to hyperventilate. Unlike the majority of the orphans who don't know their parents, and therefore hold on to the hope that they may have a chance at inheriting an affinity, Milo knew that both of his parents and grandparents were unawakened. Therefore, his chances of awakening an affinity are extremely slim. Therefore, he had long given up hope of becoming a beast tamer and instead focused the majority of his energy onto his academic courses. Similar to Cain, the 14-year-old had entered high school with the highest exam ranking and hoped to maintain that ranking until college when he could hopefully enter a decent academic major. However, instead of being thrilled by the presence of the celestivulates, he looked scared. They had ignited something very dangerous in him, hope. And he did not want to futilely get his hopes up only to be crushed at the ceremony in 4 years. Aware of Milo's worries, Cain knelt next to him while signaling with his eyes for the others to leave the room. Milo had always admired Cain the most due to his stellar grades. This admiration only grew when he found out that he had also been admitted into the competitive planner major with a perfect score. Therefore, Cain knew that he'd listen the most to what he had to say now. Milo, I know you must be filled with uncertainty and fear right now. It's completely natural to be overwhelmed when faced with an opportunity for something you'd always thought was impossible. It's as if the very ground beneath you has shifted. But remember, this chance isn't something to be apprehensive of, and hope isn't some huge enemy. This is an opportunity to step into a new chapter, one where you get to explore a side of yourself you've only dreamed of. And while it's true that you may not awaken, what is certain is your courage and worth. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to have doubts. What matters is that you have the courage to embrace something new and take a leap of faith. Whether or not you awaken an affinity, what you already possess, your character, your spirit, your ability to face the unknown, is truly extraordinary. Whatever happens, remember that you're not alone in this. You have people who care deeply about you, who believe in you no matter what. So you can take this opportunity not just with hope, but with pride in who you are now. You've got this, Milo Whitaker. And whatever the outcome in 4 years, you're already an outstanding person. Cain then pulled him into a hug, and felt his shoulder gradually get soaked. Taker, man. Came a faint voice. What? Cain wasn't able to hear him clearly. My name is Milo Whitaker Newman, he said clearly, after lifting his tear-streaked face from Cain's shoulder. His face now filled with a lot more confidence. Cain's face immediately broke out into a huge grin, and pulled him back in for another hug. The next morning, Cain went downstairs to see Milo in the backyard next to the Oros. Usually, by his age, students have already fully, or almost fully saturated their spiritual spaces with spiritual power. That is, unless their talent is extremely poor. The remaining time until the affinity ceremony is usually spent on trying to condense all of that free spiritual power into a star. It's a difficult process that is difficult to guide others through, therefore a lot of trial and error is needed for the first star especially. Milo wasn't untalented, however, since he had no hope in awakening an affinity, he thought it'd be useless to take time away from studying to cultivate. Especially since the boost to mental strength provided prior to the first contract is not huge. However, now Milo was working diligently to increase his spiritual power. How long has Milo been out there? He asked Bridge, who just came back in for a break after training his contracts. He was already out there when I got up to start training, so since before the sun rose. Cain was touched by Milo's sudden determination. Wanting to give him a little extra support, he went into the kitchen and began to brew a pot of tea made from the leaves of one of the spiritual plants they collected that can increase the rate of spiritual power condensation, and added some spiritual honey to the cup. While he was in the kitchen, he also added a few more containers of tea to the pantry and a jar of honey. He then went out to where Milo was with the teacup and a journal. Milo, you must have been out there for at least 5 hours now, come take a break. Sitting next to Milo, Cain handed him the cup after explaining the effects, and handed him his journal. This was a journal I wrote during the time I was struggling to condense my first star. It has all of my mistakes as well as the different strategies I tried. The process of forming each start is very different between individuals, but I hope this will be of some help to you. Cain wanted to continue talking about his experiences and even offer to buy Milo his first contract as an incentive, but decided against it in fear that Milo would feel pressured to succeed in the affinity ceremony. So he headed back inside and began to organize a training plan for himself and his new partners so that he could familiarize himself with their abilities. Old enemy. Compared to before he left for the exam, and he and B only had white spiritual power, they had now both advanced and were joined by a team of red-grade Vesperi guards. Cain was filled with renewed confidence in his strength, and for a while there was one personal goal that he wanted to achieve as the ultimate indicator of his improvement in strength. He wanted to hunt the orange-grayed white widow mother that he'd been helpless against previously. Now that Bee had advanced, while not able to kill, she should be able to greatly affect its movements unlike before. Also, now he had 2 pieces of 2-star enchanted equipment. Not to sound overconfident, but he didn't actually think it'd be that challenging anymore. Therefore, after buying a space ring and filling it with supplies, he went into the woods he'd previously been too scared to re-enter. He looked down at the map he'd purchased at the gates and realized that the white widow spider had last been seen in her nest, indicating that she'd stopped looking for him. He released all 7 of the remaining guards and headed in the direction of the white widow's territory. Surprisingly, along the way, likely intimidated by a large group of red-grayed creatures, they ran into no other spiritual creatures. Ugh! At some point, Cain started to occasionally feel thin invisible threads stick to his body. He reached towards where he felt the thread on his forehead and pulled it off. Gradually the number of webs became visible due to their density. So dense that the sunlight above began to be filtered out. The webs stretched from tree to tree like colossal, ghostly tapestries. Draped over branches, and wrapped around trunks, they formed a translucent dome that dimmed all light to a pale, sickly hue. Wrapped around one of the tree trunks were the remnants of a once majestic creature. An enormous elk, its body suspended in an unnatural pose in the webbing. Evidence of the white widow's past feast was obvious in the once vibrant fur becoming matted and blood-stained. The elk's limbs were twisted and bound, with eyes lifelessly staring out, and the webbing covering it was discolored from the dried blood and decaying flesh. Scree! One of the wasp guards got caught in a web while moving forward. Cain quickly cut it down while reminding everyone else to be careful. From what he knew of spiders, they used vibrations in their webs to detect when a prey had been caught. Therefore, it could already be on its way towards them. To be safe, Cain released the mist in advance around them while using his spear to cut down any webs around them as they moved deeper into the spider's lair. When they reached what Cain assumed was the heart of the nest due to the dense number of dried carcasses, he still didn't see the white widow. Cain decided to expand the mist's distance so that hopefully a few of the droplets containing BEA splits would make contact and give him some information on where it was hiding. After a few minutes he received information from Bee that the absolute edges of the mist had made contact with something in the shape of a spider leg. However, none of the splits were breathed in. Maybe she's too far away for the mist to be breathed in. However, Cain had already extended the mist to the limit. Cain had already cut away all of the webs in this area to prepare for the upcoming battle. He didn't want to change the battlefield only for himself or the guards to end up stuck in a web laid as a trap. I need to lure her here, and I have the perfect method. Cain removed all of the mist covering the area for a brief moment, knowing that he was being watched. He looked straight in the direction that Bee had sensed a spider leg in. Remember me? Your kid's corpse made me a pretty penny last time. Thought I'd drop by and thank you in person. Scree! Orange-grayed spiritual creatures can usually understand humans they aren't bound to, therefore it perfectly understood Cain's words of provocation and they infuriated her. Cain's plan worked as it rapidly headed towards him at a speed far faster than he anticipated. It's even slightly faster than the wind attribute Vesperi guards. He immediately covered the area in a dense fog while moving from his previous location. Good thing too, because the ground he'd previously been standing on was destroyed with a violent stab downward not long later. However, he wasn't as afraid of her much longer. Once her body was covered by the dense fog, BEA splits found an opportunity to enter. Gradually her speed lowered to a level slightly beneath the guards after Bee began to take effect. Knowing that Bee wouldn't be able to kill her, Cain was finally able to experiment with some of the strategies he'd wanted to try in the past but couldn't do to Bee, always causing a quick kill in white and red-grayed beasts. He told Bee to focus her effects on causing disorientation and impaired vision. Cain then began to alter the density and shape of the mist in certain areas to mess with the spider. With repeated usage of the spear, he'd already developed much better control over the mist than when he first started. He began by trying to replicate the shape of a large bear. It looked kinda bear-like. The silhouette still wasn't perfect, but it was more than enough to distract the spider with its senses and thinking ability impaired by Bee. At the moment it was distracted by the bear. The 7 wasps lying in wait from the opposite direction launched their stingers. However, despite being distracted and the surprise attack, the spider managed to dodge most of the stingers with only 3 successfully hitting. And the ones that did hit were only at non-vital limbs. The orange grade is really different. I can't believe she still dodged that. But although they didn't cause fatal damage, the successful hits were able to drastically limit her mobility. The future attacks should be more successful. However, the spider rapidly turned in the direction the stingers flew from and threw up a large amount of corrosive poison. The bulk of it hit one wasp, killing it instantly, while some splashed onto the wing of another, causing it to drop to the ground unable to fly. Damn it. Now there were only 5 guards with some combat effectiveness. Seeing that it wanted to pursue in the direction the injured wasp dropped, Cain directed B to cause a headache, while Cain recalled the injured into his star space. Scree! While the spider was suffering from crippling pain, the rest of the wasps moved from their original locations, while Cain continued to direct them from the shadows. Phenio's turmoil. With 3 of its 8 legs out of commission, Cain had them launch another attack as soon as their stingers had regrown. He also reminded them to immediately change their locations, this time after launching an attack. This time all 5 shots managed to land, with 3 actually landing on its main body. However, its hard exoskeleton caused the shots to not go in as deeply as he'd expected. Although it was clearly in great pain from the injuries, they were far from fatal. Cain called out Queen next to him, ensuring that the figures of both of them were covered by the dense mist. He didn't want to risk her dying. Although she wasn't his main contract, he wasn't sure what the impact of her death would be on Eve, as their lives are closely intertwined. After she activated Royal Command to boost all of their stats, the guards launched another attack. By this point the spider was practically a sitting duck. He'd have felt bad for her if she didn't almost kill him previously and lose one of his guards now. It'd take at least a month for numbers of the guards to be restored to a full 12, with Queen only being able to lay 1 egg a week. This time the attacks pierced much deeper into the spider and she dropped to the ground motionless not long after. How spiteful. Cain would have walked over to examine the corpse by now and extracting parts if he had not relayed to him that she was not actually dead. Her performance was impeccable, and perfectly fooled him. She likely was playing dead in the hopes of launching a surprise attack on him in her last moments to go down together. Once their stingers grew back, and with the boost from Queen still active, he had them launch 3 more rounds of attacks on the body before finally receiving confirmation from B that she had died. Throughout the whole process the spider remained unmoving, completely committed to the act. Even if Cain had been cautious and launched a round of attacks at the corpse, without B he wouldn't have thought she could be so resilient and still hold, and would have definitely went up to her after the first round of attacks. Asterisk ding. Host has killed 1 orange-grade spiritual beast asterisk. Ah. That's right. I also have you system. Cain vowed to always wait for the notification in the future before moving to extract parts. Cain was grateful that he now had a space ring of his own. Although not the largest space, he should be able to squeeze the entire body in. Especially once it is disassembled. He began by carefully removing the exoskeleton, before moving on to the most valuable poison sac. He then removed the eyes and fangs. Once all the parts of significant value were removed, only 2/3 of the space was actually taken up. Cain moved to leave the nest with a pile of valueless internal organs behind him when he spotted a cloudy pearl covered by webs. Ah. That's why she stopped looking for me. She probably just decided to make a replacement. The offspring of a silver-quality orange-grade spiritual beast would be quite valuable. Even if before it evolved it was only a bronze-quality venom spinner. The fact that it had a parent that successfully evolved boded well for its level of talent and potential once it hatched. If its pedigree could be proven, it'd probably fetch double the price of a random venom spinner egg in the wild. However, since Cain could not put the egg into the space ring and he didn't want to cart around an egg for days in the wilderness, he decided to head back to the city. For general parts, he'd usually sell them by the gate, but for the high-quality parts of a orange-grade spiritual creature, Cain felt as though he'd receive more from a blacksmith who'd have a tangible use for the parts. Thankfully, he was already very familiar with one. He went back to the familiar shop and immediately saw Phenio's. He didn't look depressed, so he assumed that he'd also passed his entrance exam. Cain jovially went over prepared to congratulate him. Can I assume that we'll both be students at a top 5 college this fall? Phenio's also grinned. I assume you passed the Dark Moon exam then. Cain nodded. How did the Starfire exam go? What was your mission? Phenio's expression turned awkward. It was an intelligence-gathering mission, rather than one that required fighting. Our team completed the mission, but unfortunately my individual performance wasn't strong enough to receive an admissions offer. Kane was confused. Why did he nod when he had asked if they'd both be top 5 college students? So I rushed to take the Supernova College exam and barely scraped in at the 100th spot. Well, the ranking doesn't matter, Kane comforted, the important thing is that you got in. Phineas looked touched at his words, thanks. How was the Dark Moon exam? Now it was Kane's turn to look awkward. Seeing his expression, Phineas misunderstood the reason and tried to comfort him. As you said, the ranking isn't important, don't be afraid to tell me. Whether rank 1 or 100, we're all students at the same top 5 college anyways. Kane sighed in relief and shared, I did pretty well and was lucky enough to finish in first place. Phineas, frozen in shock, looked as though he had turned into stone. Phineas? Phineas. Kane waved his hand in front of his face. Phineas got up without another word and headed into the back room to call his teacher. He refused to converse with Kane any longer. Every time they spoke he left with his pride crushed. Shortly after, the owner of the shop walked out from the back room looking awkward. Phineas suddenly had urgent business to attend to, so I'll be helping you instead. It must have been an emergency for him to walk off suddenly like that. I hope everything is okay. That's okay. You were actually who I needed to speak with. I have some spiritual creature materials I want to dispose of and wanted to sell them to you. Okay, let me see what you've got. He didn't have high hopes. After all, Kane awoke just 3 months ago, the max level he could hunt was probably of red grade. Kane pulled out the exoskeleton of the White Widow and placed it on the floor. Is this? Kane confirmed his doubts, it's the White Widow spider from outside the city. The max strength of the spiritual creatures around their city was the orange level and they were all well known by the beast tamers of the city, so he was naturally surprised at its body being casually placed in front of him. This spider had lurked outside of the city for over a decade. And why is its body with you? He had a hunch but he couldn't believe it. Because I killed it. Kane was confused, how else would he have her body? Crash. Phineas, eavesdropping on the other side of the door, fell over in shock. That's it. I am staying far away from that monster from now on. My self-esteem can't take much more of this. Outside, both of them looked towards the sudden loud noise, startled, but quickly forgot about the disturbance. The blacksmith was giddy at the prospect of making a weapon from a material higher in quality than he'd usually get in this city. Usually to make 2-star weapons he needed to go to Starfire City to buy materials, which was obviously more expensive than buying it from the young men in front of him. Kane was thinking about how much money the parts of an orange-grade spiritual creature would fetch him. 1.2 million, the blacksmith offered. Kane was internally shocked that it'd be worth that much, but decided not to show it on his face. He didn't know how much this body should be worth, but he had a feeling the man in front of him was a sly fox and wouldn't immediately give him the max price he'd be willing to offer. I won't accept lower than 3 million. The blacksmith's face turned awkward. The highest I can go is 2.5, it's already an incredibly high offer, and I probably won't even be able to expect much of a profit. Kane stared him down, but his face looked sincere. Deal, he held out his hand. Deal. And the exchange was sealed with a handshake. The name's Dorian Anvil. If you have any more materials of similar quality in the future, please come to me. I'll definitely give you a decent price. Kane nodded before leaving the store with a wide grin. When Kane was out of view, Dorian smirked. Clearly, both of them walked away from the deal feeling like they'd pulled one over the other. Kane then headed to the school. He planned to sell the egg to the school's nursery. It'd probably not be highest price he could fetch for it, but he already picked up a bargain from them with Princess, who not only helped Bridge pass his exam, but also played a huge role in Kane being able to get his second contract. Therefore, he wanted to pay it forward. While he was there, he also wanted to give Mr. Evergreen the spiritual tea leaves he prepared for him. Going towards the nursery, Kane flagged down the breeder who had helped him previously, Merida. She seemed to pretty intensely value the commission. Also, she'd allowed him to take the dead egg for free and still exchange for Princess. She immediately ran over, thinking that he was a prospective customer, but slowed down when she realized it was just him and he didn't look like he wanted to make a purchase. Don't turn away. I came here to sell an egg, a very valuable egg. He hurriedly called out when she looked like she wanted to turn away to find someone that would provide her with commission. She paused her turn, but her unimpressed eyes seemed to scream that she doubted he'd provide anything of value. Cain pulled out the egg from where he had it stored in a satchel. This is a venom spinner egg. Not only that, it's an egg laid by the orange-grayed white widow in the forest. She stepped forward to examine the egg. Venom spinners were a pretty rare species, and if everything he said was true, then even if she didn't get a commission, she'd be handsomely rewarded by the school. She could pretty easily confirm that it was a venom spinner egg, but she wasn't sure if what he said about its parent was also true. Seeing the doubt on her face, he continued, I have the eyes and fangs from its mother. Also, you can probably confirm by now at the city gates that the white widow spider is dead. Cain took the remaining parts he had from the mother out and let her see. It's unlikely that someone who could obtain orange-grade materials would be trying to scam a public school, so she took Cain to the back office and completed the sale. He obtained 500,000 CD. And that was due to its genealogy, otherwise it'd have been at most 400,000 CD. He could have probably easily obtained $1 million from a purchaser outside of the school, but he had already known that when he resolved to sell it to the school as repayment for their care of him for the past 4 years. He then headed to Mr. Evergreen. Although the school year had ended, the diligent teacher never took a break and was in attendance all year round. Cain knocked on his office door to see him revising lesson plans that he'd probably already revised continuously for years. Cain. I'm surprised to see you. How did your exams go? Cain grinned, you are looking at a double beast taming and planner major at Dark Moon College. Great. That's great. Out of all of my students, you were the one I was most confident in. Glad to see my instincts were correct. I also came to give you a gift to thank you for taking care of me the past year. Cain then took out the spiritual tea for increasing mental strength that he'd had transferred to a decorative container with the description engraved on its side. His teacher accepted it gratefully, surprised by the high value of the gift, but didn't try to refuse it. Task completed, Cain was about to leave to avoid disturbing him while he worked. Wait. Mr. Evergreen suddenly stood up and went to a painting on the wall. Removing the painting, he revealed a hidden safe that he then unlocked. Cain was curious but restrained himself from peeking inside. Mr. Evergreen then pulled out a vibrant green seed. The moment it appeared, the very air in the room seemed to be cleaner and Cain's mind was clearer. Suddenly, Cain felt a response from his second star space. Eve conveyed that, similar to her, that seed had the rare life attribute. And Cain felt the strongest emotion he'd probably ever felt through the contract before, an overwhelmingly intense hunger. Chapter 86, The Legacy of Verdaris. I majored in history at Starfire College. As a history major, like most academic majors, we are required to write a senior thesis in order to graduate. However, history majors must write a thesis related to our empire's history. Thesis topics vary greatly and could be translating a dead language, reinterpreting historical text, uncovering new details about historical events and more. I chose for my thesis to analyze the key events that led up to the Battle of Verdaris. As I'm sure you know, before the Celestial Empire was established, this continent was in a chaotic state where the majority of the people lived in city-states that usually centered around one very powerful beast tamer responsible for protecting the nation. One such city-state, Verdaris, was said to not only be one of the most powerful, but also the most abundant in natural resources. It was as though their very land was blessed. When there was a famine throughout the region and all of the other nearby states were starving, they were the only ones left unscathed. Naturally, their wealth caused them to be eyed by everyone around them. In order to establish a strong ally for themselves, they entered a political marriage with the neighboring city-state of Silvoria. Naturally, this marriage would be between the daughter of Verdaris to the ruler Silvoria. However, on the night of the wedding, the ruler of Silvoria decided to kill his fiancée and her entire family, desiring to take the fertile land for himself rather than share. However, not long after the Verdaris family died, the once fertile lands were also struck by a famine, before they eventually devolved into the barren deserts we now see beyond our nation's most southern borders. Most historians had assumed that the source of the Verdaris city-state's rich resources was due to the blessing of some extremely powerful spiritual creature contracted by the ruler. However, when I had analyzed the historical texts I'd received from abroad previously for an ancient languages course, I'd realized that similar stories had been replayed throughout history during different time periods, in different regions, and even on different continents. The protagonists of these stories, or at least the ones we know enough about, also all have different affinities. So I began to wonder what was causing these resource-rich areas in otherwise deserted regions. It can't possibly be a contract. Therefore I took a trip to the most recent location where such a story had occurred, the northern region of our own celestial empire. It wasn't always such a frigid wasteland, you know. At least not completely. The northwestern portion used to be described as an abundant utopia. But now it's no different from the rest of the north. While I was acting as a visiting exchange student at Frozen Sun College, I had visited an area I had believed to most closely match the location of that previously fertile zone. It was pretty much a dead zone, but while I was searching, some ants grabbed some of the crumbs I'd dropped while eating lunch. They were just ordinary ants, with no spiritual power, yet somehow they were surviving in the freezing cold. I hadn't expected for there to be anything around me in the freezing cold, at least not anything without an ice attribute. I followed the ants and found a hidden hole in the snow where their colony was located. As I approached the hole, the surrounding temperature was slightly warmer, the air was fresher, and I felt as though I'd just woken up from an excellent night's rest, and not been tirelessly exploring the snow for days. I wasn't sure what was in there, but I felt strongly that it was likely what I'd gone there in search of. Or at least closely related to it. So I pushed down my disgust and dug through the ant colony to obtain the seed. And from the moment I first laid eyes on it, I knew it was special. My life's wish is to uncover its origin. However, unfortunately, that's where my capabilities end. I don't think I can uncover its mysteries or the true history of what happened back then. So, I'd like to give it to you. Hopefully, you can finish what I started. Cain was stunned by the unexpected story and the seed. However, he couldn't bear to refuse it, especially not after feeling Eve's desperation for it. He knew that whatever this seed was of absolute importance to Eve. Therefore, it was of absolute importance to him. After you brought back the seed, nobody from either Starfire College or Frozen Sun helped you investigate its origin. Surely they'd be more useful than me. I'm not even entering college as a history major. Mr. Evergreen looked embarrassed. When I told my professor my chosen thesis project, he thought it was a fool's errand and didn't support my idea. I had to change my topic, so technically when I got permission to do an exchange at Frozen Sun College, I was supposed to be investigating the history of one of their relics. All of the texts they lent me and resources they provided were supposed to be for that project, and that project only. I could have gotten into trouble for wasting valuable time and resources on investigating something off-topic. Although not a historian, you are now a beast tamer. Therefore, you'll have the ability to travel to regions I could never hope to enter. This seed would be better off in your hands. Cain no longer refused and tried to put it into his ring space. However, unlike most seeds, it was rejected due to the strong aura of life it emitted. He could only place it into his bag to carry it home. Cain originally came here to give Mr. Evergreen a gift, but instead he'd received something so valuable in exchange. He felt pretty guilty. Therefore, Cain decided to take out 2 more containers from his stash of spiritual tea and place them on the desk before leaving. Chapter 87, Second Home. Cain didn't immediately give Eve the seed. He had no idea why she felt this hunger or if the seed would actually be beneficial. Even if it is beneficial, would he regret using it right now if there was a better usage for it in the future? What if it was a key ingredient for Eve's evolution and so its energy wasn't used as efficiently than if combined with other materials? He returned home to stash the seed under his bed. The room had been empty the last few days, since Bridge had been training overnight at the dojo. They were practically holding him hostage after finding out that he'd be starting at Dark Moon soon, wanting to cram as much knowledge and training into him as possible. Therefore, it's unlikely that the remaining unawakened people in the house would be able to detect the aura given off by the seed. Cain didn't want to waste even one moment of his remaining 2.5 weeks before school started. Therefore, he went back out into the wild to continue familiarizing himself with the weapons at his disposal. Maybe he'd even try to clear out all the orange-grade spiritual creatures around the city. After all, with them gone, then even in the unlikely event of a beast tide, it is unlikely that the city's walls would even be broken. 2 weeks later. Cain looked down at the body of the massive spike root Wyrm. Its dragon-like body was covered in thorny, bark-like scales that blended seamlessly into the surrounding vegetation, allowing it to ambush unsuspecting prey. The WYRM had a spiked tail and claws that could easily shred through armor and flesh alike. This was the last remaining of the 9 orange-grade spiritual creature in the forest. It was also the undisputed ruler of these forests and supposedly the strongest. It should have also been the most difficult to hand, but that was surprisingly easy. He had left this one to the end because he thought it'd be the most challenging due to its reputation and remnant dragon blood, but after having its vision and senses impaired by bee-infected mist, it had pretty much served as target practice for the wasps. 3 more guard wasps had been born, giving Cain a total of 10 now. However, despite its formidable close combat abilities, unlike the White Widow, it didn't even have any long-range capabilities, therefore Cain had not even had to suffer from losing one of his guards. Good thing too, since college classes will begin in 4 days. He'd completed the goal of hunting 10 red grade twice over, receive 120 GP. And with this WYRM he would have completed 10 orange grade kills for the first time to receive 400 GP, meaning he was now halfway to the system upgrade. Once he enters the college to receive the 1000 GP for his ranking, he will be able to upgrade with over 500 GP spare. Today would be the day he'd head off to the train station to begin his first day as a college student. He had already gone back to the city more than once to sell the materials he'd obtained to Blacksmith Dorian. Now his space only contained the WYRM, however, despite Cain being unimpressed by the battle he had with it, it was objectively a dragon-blooded creature. Therefore, its body may have additional uses that he was currently unaware of. He decided to not sell it until after he'd entered the college, maybe it'd come in handy later on. After going home and packing his school supplies and the mysterious seed, he and Bridge had a late lunch with the members of the orphanage before they both set off to the train station. However, when they boarded the train he came across Phineos, likely taking the train to Starfire City before getting off and transferring to a train headed west to Supernova College. Cain raised his hand to greet him when they made eye contact from far away, but surprisingly he turned around and quickly boarded the train. Perhaps he didn't see him. When Cain and Bridge boarded the train, Cain glanced around a bit for Phineos, wanting to continue their chat about their respective exams. He was curious what the top performers at the Supernova exam were like. However, it seemed like he'd already entered a private room so Cain couldn't find him. After all, he wouldn't go and knock on over 100 room doors just to chat with an acquaintance. The whole ride to Starfire City they unfortunately never crossed paths, disappointing Cain. Now that the train was headed east, Phineos had likely already gotten off and was heading on another train west. When they finally arrived Dark Moon City, Cain couldn't help but take a deep breath of air. The very atmosphere of the city felt different to him now that he was officially a student. It was likely just in his head, but it felt much more comfortable being here. As if the very city was greeting him saying, "Welcome to your second home for 4 years." Cain and Bridge confirmed their attendance with the administration office in order to receive their schedules and the keys to their respective rooms. As they'd been informed previously, he and Bridge were in separate buildings. Cain would be living in the dorms only for the top 5 students of each grade level, meaning that there would only be 20 people in the entire building. Meanwhile, Bridge would be in one of the 2 male college dorms housing around 100 students. They both headed to the campus bookstore to get the required textbooks for their classes, Cain obviously needing to purchase several more than Bridge due to his second academic major before heading back to their respective dorms. Cain was filled with anticipation at finally getting to see the dorms exclusively used by the top 5 students of each year. And fortunately, he was not disappointed. Rather than a dorm building, his new residence looked like a sprawling 5-story mansion that the English royal family back on Earth may live in. Past the ornate black iron front gate that scanned his student ID card before granting him entrance, there was a black marble fountain in the shape of a winged horse-like creature but had dragon scales covering its body. The front garden was also beautifully designed with hundreds of spiritual plants, all of which he could feel had the function of increasing the density of spiritual power in the surroundings. Entering the mansion, the floor was covered in black marble tiles and a giant chandelier hung down from the foyer. Above a massive winding grand staircase that he could see extended up 5 floors. The whole mansion seemed to continue the theme of medieval elegance that the rest of the city had. Cain walked up the stairs to the 2nd floor to find his assigned room, room 202. Floors 2 to 5 had the bedrooms, while the 1st floor had the shared amenities. It seems that with the central staircase as the dividing line, 2 rooms were on the east side of the house, while 3 more rooms were on the other side to the west. Entering his room, Kane was extremely impressed. He couldn't believe he'd get to live here for 4 years, that is if he kept his ranking. The room boasted high vaulted ceilings adorned with detailed paintings of flowers. A massive chandelier hung from the center, casting a dazzling array of lights across the room. Dark red velvet sofas and ornate armchairs surrounded a grand fireplace, creating an inviting sitting area. Opposite the fireplace, a polished mahogany study area was equipped with a seemingly antique writing desk and chair. Through large glass double doors, Kane could even see a sweeping balcony with wrought iron railings offering breathtaking views over the campus. Turning his head, Kane could see the doors to his bedroom, the bed a regal centerpiece with deep, dark mahogany carved with intricate lines. Heavy, embroidered drapes framed the bed, adding an extra touch of elegance and privacy, while a tufted footstool completed the room. Finally, Kane explored the private bathroom. It exuded luxury with its dark marble surfaces, freestanding clawfoot tub, large walk-in shower and ornate gold fixtures. Kane was extremely satisfied. The room seamlessly fused classic elegance with modern comforts. It was just to his taste. Bridge might just die of envy. Kane thought gleefully. Asterisk ding. Sensing that the host has confirmed his college admissions ranking. Rewarding 500 GP for a second-place ranking asterisk. Kane's joyful thoughts came to a screaming halt. Excuse me. Second place.
Hello, everyone. I wanted to take a moment to announce that this audiobook has reached its conclusion, as there will be no more chapters beyond this point. Unfortunately, the continuation of the story is not possible due to circumstances beyond our control, such as the author deciding to drop the novel or other unforeseen reasons. I understand how disappointing this news may be, especially for those of you who have been eagerly following along and looking forward to future chapters. However, I believe it's important to be transparent about the situation. Regrettably, the likelihood of any new updates for this novel is very slim. That said, I want to take this opportunity to express my deepest gratitude to all of you for your continued support throughout this journey. Whether you've been with us from the beginning or recently joined, your enthusiasm and love for the story have been greatly appreciated. I hope you've enjoyed the experience up to this point, even if it couldn't reach a full conclusion. Thank you again for your understanding and for being a part of this audiobook adventure.